Hey guys, before we begin, I want you to get comfortable. Sit or lay down, dim the lights, and then let's begin. We'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Drop a comment if you'd like to share. The rumble of artillery was nothing compared to the thunderous silence that followed the opening of a Dear John letter. These were the breakout bombs dropped on unsuspecting servicemen, and trust me, they packed a punch. You could say these letters were the 1940s equivalent of a breakup text, but with a much longer delivery time and far more devastating impact. In an era before instant messaging and social media, soldiers learned their romantic fate through snail mail, and the results were often as messy as a battlefield. During World War II, the Dear John letter became a cultural phenomenon, a staple of wartime communication that highlighted the strains of long-distance relationships under the shadow of conflict. The origins of these letters are as murky as a muddy trench, but the general consensus is that they evolved from the emotional turmoil of separation. With millions of men shipped off to distant lands, the women they left behind found themselves in a peculiar predicament. Some waited faithfully, while others, faced with the uncertainty of war, decided to move on. The result? A surge in these heartbreaking missives. Now, if you're wondering why these letters were called Dear John and not Dear Bill or Dear Sam, you're in good company. The exact reason remains elusive, but John was a popular and generic name at the time, much like John Doe is today. It was a catch-all for any serviceman unlucky enough to receive such a letter. And unlucky they were. The psychological impact on soldiers was profound. Imagine receiving a letter after weeks of anticipation, only to find out your sweetheart had found solace in someone else's arms. It was a gut punch that could leave a soldier reeling, affecting morale and mental health in ways that were often underestimated. The role of male censorship during the war added another layer of complexity to this already tangled web of emotions. Military censors screened letters to ensure sensitive information didn't fall into enemy hands, but they also inadvertently became witnesses to the personal dramas unfolding on the page. These censors, often fellow soldiers, would read through the intimate details of servicemen's lives, including the dreaded Dear John letters. It was a peculiar job, part espionage, part soap opera. Wartime communication itself was fraught with peculiarities. Letters could take weeks or even months to reach their destination. By the time a soldier received a Dear John letter, his former lover might have already moved on to a new relationship, possibly even married with children on the way. The delay added a cruel twist to an already painful situation. And it wasn't just the servicemen who suffered. Many women, too, faced their own dilemmas, caught between loyalty to a distant lover and the pressing realities of life on the home front. The Dear John letter is a perfect example of how the romantic narratives of war often clash with harsh realities. We love to romanticize the idea of love surviving against all odds, but the truth is, war strains relationships to the breaking point. It's a testament to the human condition. We crave connection, yet circumstances sometimes pull us apart. And let's not forget the economic and social factors at play. With millions of men away at war, women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers, gaining independence and new social circles. The world was changing rapidly, and so were the dynamics of relationships. In some ways, the Dear John letter was an inevitable consequence of these seismic shifts. It was the manifestation of a society in flux, where traditional roles were being challenged and redefined. And while the letters themselves were often painful, they also represented a form of agency for women, a way to take control of their lives in uncertain times. For the soldiers, however, they were often a bitter pill to swallow, a reminder that while they were fighting for freedom, they were also losing something deeply personal. Primary sources from the era provide a window into this emotional landscape. In one letter, a young woman wrote, "I waited as long as I could, but the heart wants what it wants." Brutal, yet honest. These letters weren't just about ending relationships. They were about confronting the realities of war and the human desire for companionship and stability. In the end, the Dear John letter is more than just a footnote in history. It's a reflection of the complex interplay between love, war, and the human spirit. And while we can chuckle at the absurdities of wartime romance from the comfort of hindsight, it's worth remembering the very real emotions and challenges faced by those who lived through it. So next time you hear someone waxing lyrical about the romanticism of wartime love, Just remind them of the reality check that came in the form of a Dear John letter. And speaking of reality checks, let's pivot to another morale booster during World War II that was as effective as it was controversial, the pin-up girl. Ah, the pin-up, the quintessential symbol of wartime propaganda dressed in glamour and lipstick. If the Dear John letter was the bitter pill, then pin-up girls were the spoonful of sugar, sweet, seductive, and strategically served to lift spirits. Let's talk numbers. By the mid-1940s, an estimated 5 million pin-up calendars were circulating among servicemen. And who's the face that launched 1,000 pin-ups? None other than the iconic Betty Grable. Her famous pose back turned, head over shoulder, legs insured for a cool $1,000,000, became the go-to image plastered on the walls of barracks and inside lockers. It's said that Grable's picture was carried by more American soldiers than any other image, which is quite the feat considering the competition included the likes of Rita Hayworth and Lana Turner. But this wasn't just about eye candy. Oh no, this was sophisticated psychological warfare. You see, pin-up girls were more than just pretty faces. They were weapons of morale, carefully crafted to remind soldiers what they were fighting for: home, apple pie, and, of course, the girl next door who somehow always looked like a Hollywood starlet. The pin-up was a promise of normalcy and a future to return to, wrapped in curves and charisma. And here's where the propaganda machine kicked into high gear. The US government, no slouch in recognizing the power of sex appeal, actively encouraged the distribution of pin-ups. Military publications like Yank and Stars and Stripes regularly featured these images, ensuring they were as ubiquitous as military rations. The idea was simple: keep the troops motivated and focused. After all, a happy soldier is a fighting soldier, and nothing was quite as motivating as the thought of a beautiful woman waiting back home. But why did this work so well? For one, the pin-up played into the idealized vision of American femininity, approachable yet unattainable, wholesome yet alluring. It was a balancing act that kept soldiers dreaming without distracting them too much from their duties. And let's not forget the camaraderie these images fostered among troops, providing a common, albeit fantastical, talking point that transcended rank and duty. Now, peel back the glossy surface and you'll find an interesting economic angle. The war effort wasn't just about bullets and tanks, it was a massive economic engine. The entertainment industry, including Hollywood, played its part by producing morale-boosting films and images. The pin-up, in many ways, was a product of this economic collaboration, a subtle nod to consumer culture even amidst the austerity of war. But as with all things that seemed too good to be true, there was a darker side to this tale. The use of pin-up girls wasn't without its critics. Some argued that reducing women to mere objects of desire was a step backward, a commercial exploitation of femininity under the guise of patriotism. While the pin-up was celebrated as a symbol of hope, it was also a reminder of how women's roles were being redefined or constrained by societal expectations. And let's not forget the psychological impact on the soldiers themselves. While many found solace in these images, others experienced a sense of longing that could never be fulfilled. The pin-up was a double-edged sword, offering comfort on one side and a reminder of absence on the other. It was a fantasy that could never live up to reality, a bittersweet illusion that, much like the Dear John letter, highlighted the emotional complexities of wartime life. In essence, the pin-up was both a symbol and a strategy, a tool of propaganda dressed in glamour. It was a reflection of the era's cultural norms and a testament to the enduring power of visual imagery. But above all, it was a reminder of the human need for connection and hope, even in the darkest of times. As we peel back the layers, we're left with a fascinating glimpse into the psyche of a generation, a blend of desire, duty, and the quest for something to hold on to when the world seemed to be falling apart. In the end, the pin-up was more than just a photograph. It was a piece of home, a promise wrapped in a pretty package, and an enduring symbol of the complexities of war. With all this talk about pin-ups and promises, let's take a detour down a darker alley, one where the neon lights flicker dubiously and the shadowy figures of economic desperation and human frailty meet. Welcome to the black market of sex during Untold, where the aphrodisiac of anonymity danced with the cold, hard realities of wartime economics. Imagine the scene: military bases scattered across Europe and the Pacific, teeming with soldiers high on adrenaline and low on outlets for their youthful energies. Enter the brothel, a sort of unofficial R&R facility where the currency wasn't just cash, but also loneliness, desire, and a desperate grasp at something resembling normalcy. These establishments popped up like mushrooms after a rain, especially near military bases. They weren't the stuff of romanticized Hollywood films, but rather gritty, often grim realities for the women involved. Now, the economics of this underground industry were as complex as a cryptic crossword. The basic principle, however, was good old-fashioned supply and demand. With an influx of soldiers, you had a skyrocketing demand for companionship, a euphemism as thin as a soldier's ration card. And where there's demand, supply isn't far behind. Women, many driven by poverty and circumstance, found themselves at the sharp end of this transactional stick. Let's talk numbers. In Paris alone, the number of registered brothels reached around 100 by 1940, with countless more operating in the shadows. Prices varied as wildly as wartime inflation. A visit could cost a soldier anything from a few cigarettes to several dollars. Currency, after all, is a flexible concept in wartime. The economic realities were stark. For many women, this life was not a choice but a necessity, a way to feed their families in a world where employment options were as scarce as peace treaties. Brothels near military bases functioned like mini economies. They were often tolerated by military authorities who saw them as a necessary evil, a way to keep soldiers content and, crucially, disease-free. You see, venereal disease was the silent saboteur of many a military campaign. It's estimated that during the war, American troops suffered over 600,000 cases of VDA number that could cripple operations faster than a battalion of enemy tanks. The military, ever the pragmatist, sometimes even regulated these establishments, ensuring medical checks in an effort to keep their troops fighting fit. But here's the kicker. The romanticized notion of the brothel as a place of camaraderie and relief for soldiers was largely a myth. The reality was often brutal and exploitative. Women working in these environments faced harsh conditions, violence, and the constant threat of disease themselves. They were the invisible casualties of war, their stories too often glossed over in favor of tales of heroism and sacrifice. And let's not forget the propaganda machine, which conveniently turned a blind eye to the seedy side of the war effort. Official narratives rarely mentioned the comfort women or the economic desperation that led to such widespread exploitation. It was a tale too inconvenient for the sanitized scripts of wartime glory. The economic context of this black market was a microcosm of the broader wartime economy. Resources were redirected to fuel the war machine, leaving shortages and poverty in the civilian sectors. Women, whose husbands and brothers were off fighting, were left to fend for themselves in an economy that valued them more as symbols than as individuals. The brothel became a twisted reflection of the home front, an arena where women were both participants in and victims of the economic forces at play. Now, let's clear up another myth, the idea that all soldiers took part in this underground economy. While many did, countless others abstained, driven by a variety of personal, moral, or practical reasons. The reality was as diverse as the soldiers themselves, a mosaic of human behavior under extraordinary circumstances. In this wartime ecosystem, the brothel stood as a testament to the complexities of human nature, a place where desire met desperation, where the romantic notion of the soldier's life was stripped bare to reveal the raw, unvarnished truth. It's a side of the war that often gets left in the shadows, overshadowed by tales of valor and victory. Yet it's a crucial part of understanding the human condition in times of conflict. So, as we pull back the curtain on this less savory aspect of wartime life, we're reminded that history is rarely black and white. It's a tapestry woven with threads of hope and hardship, of dreams and disillusionment, and in the dim glow of those brothels, amid the whispers of a world at war, the stark realities of human necessity and moral ambiguity come into sharp focus. And speaking of moral ambiguity, let's pause here, because there's more to this tale than meets the eye. As we delve deeper into the economic labyrinth of war, we'll uncover more stories that challenge our perceptions and reveal the intricate dance between necessity and choice, between survival and sacrifice. But for now, let's leave the neon-lit streets behind and prepare to explore new avenues in this complex, compelling journey through history. Stay tuned, because the story is far from over. As we peel away the layers of romanticized wartime tales, let's dive headfirst into the gritty reality of the Lady of the Night's issue that tangled its way into military ranks. Yes, we're talking about the military's attempts to regulate soldiers' sexual activities. Spoiler alert, it wasn't exactly a smooth operation, and it involved way more bureaucracy than you'd expect in a tale about sex. So, picture this. Armies of young men, far from home, fueled by adrenaline and a cocktail of fear and boredom. It doesn't take a sociologist to figure out that these soldiers had, let's call it a surplus of energy. Enter the official brothel. An institution that sounds like it belongs in the annals of Monty Python rather than military history. Yet, it was a very real part of the World War II landscape, as armies attempted to channel this energy in ways that wouldn't derail the war effort. The military brass, in their infinite wisdom, decided that if they couldn't stop soldiers from seeking out companionship, they'd at least try to control it. The solution? Set up regulated brothels where soldiers could safely, and I use that term loosely, blow off some steam. The idea was to minimize the spread of venereal diseases, which were as much of a threat to military readiness as an enemy ambush. After all, a soldier in the infirmary is one less soldier on the front lines. Let's talk numbers. The British Army, for instance, officially sanctioned several brothels in North Africa to keep their troops occupied. Meanwhile, the German Wehrmacht went all in, setting up a network of military brothels across occupied Europe. Pretty much the Starbucks of wartime vice, but with far less appealing perks. These establishments weren't just corners of indulgence, they were strategically placed near military encampments, serving as a bizarre extension of military logistics. And then there was the whole concept of prophylactic stations. In an effort to combat the spread of VD, these stations were set up to provide soldiers with prophylactic treatments post-encounter. Picture a soldier leaving a brothel and heading straight to a station for a mandatory shot of penicillin. A strange cocktail of military efficiency meets medical necessity. These stations were the military's version of a morality checkpoint, ensuring soldiers could return to duty without the unwanted gift of a sexually transmitted infection. The numbers are staggering. Military, for example, distributed over 50 million condoms during the war, hoping to keep the soldiers' spirits high and their infections low. But here's where things get awkward. Despite these efforts, venereal disease rates remained alarmingly high. In fact, the U.S. Army reported that over 100,000 soldiers were sidelined by VD in 1944 alone, a statistic that would make any commanding officer break out in a cold sweat. Of course, the idea of official brothels and prophylactic stations didn't exactly sit well with everyone. A clash of moral standards and practical needs ensued, with some seeing these measures as a necessary evil, while others viewed them as a moral quagmire of epic proportions. Religious groups, social reformers, and concerned citizens voiced their outrage, arguing that such practices undermined the moral fabric of society. To them, it was as if the military had opened Pandora's box, swapping the horrors of war for a different kind of battle against vice and virtue. But let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't just about keeping soldiers disease-free, it was also about maintaining morale. War is a psychological game as much as it is a physical one. For many soldiers, these visits provided a temporary escape from the relentless grind of military life, a brief illusion of normalcy amid chaos. It was a harsh reality wrapped in the soft glow of fantasy, a reminder of the lives and loves left behind. And while the military's attempts to regulate these activities might seem like a practical solution, they were laden with contradictions. On one hand, soldiers were expected to embody the virtues of discipline and restraint. On the other, they were given tacit permission to indulge in activities that were anything but. It was a moral tightrope walk, and not everyone had the balance to pull it off. This juxtaposition of ideals versus reality highlights the complex nature of war. It's easy to paint it as a black-and-white struggle between good and evil, but the truth is far murkier. War is a messy, chaotic affair filled with shades of grey and moral ambiguity. The military, in its quest for control, found itself navigating a human landscape as unpredictable as the battlefield. Yet, beneath the surface of this awkward dance between regulation and reality lay a deeper economic narrative. The existence of these brothels and prophylactic stations was a grim reflection of the wartime economy, a world where scarcity and desperation drove people to make choices they might never have considered in peacetime. For many women, working in these establishments was a means of survival, a way to put food on the table in an era where traditional employment opportunities were drying up faster than a desert oasis. So, Let's debunk the myth that these brothels were just a salacious footnote in the history of World WSE. They were a testament to the harsh realities of war, where practical needs often clashed with moral ideals, and where the human condition was laid bare in all its complexity. In the end, the Lady of the Night issue was more than just an awkward chapter in military history. It was a microcosm of the broader struggle between desire and duty, between necessity and morality. As we move forward in this story, let's keep pulling back the curtain on the less glamorous aspects of wartime life. The tale of World War II is far from over, and there's more to uncover in this labyrinth of human experience. So, stay with me as we navigate the twists and turns of history, unearthing the stories that lie beneath the surface of the well-trodden narratives. There's a whole world of intrigue, humanity and complexity waiting to be explored, and I promise it's worth your while. And so, we find ourselves at the crossroads of history, where the echoes of wartime indulgence and necessity ripple into the post-war era. World War II wasn't just a clash of nations, it was a seismic event that reshaped the social fabric, including the very nature of gender roles and sexual norms. The war ended, but its impact continued to resonate like the lingering notes of a symphony played on the world stage. From the ashes of conflict, a new social order began to emerge, one that would eventually blossom into the sexual revolution of the 1960s. Let's talk about those gender roles first. During the war, women stepped into roles traditionally held by men: welders, pilots, factory workers, proving that Rosie the Riveter wasn't just a catchy slogan, but a symbol of the changing times. By 1945, nearly 1 in 4 married women were working outside the home, a significant leap from the pre-war era. And when the men returned, many women weren't content to just hand over the wrench and head back to the kitchen. This shift laid the groundwork for the feminist movements of the 1960s and 70s, as women pushed against the boundaries of traditional domesticity with the force of 1,000 unsent Dear John letters. But let's not forget the men. The war had exposed them to different cultures, values, and yes, sexual norms. Returning soldiers brought back more than just war stories. They carried with them a broader understanding of the world, one that sometimes clashed with the conservative values of their hometowns. This cultural exchange, coupled with advances in contraception and medicine, began to erode the rigid moral codes that had governed pre-war society. The fact that penicillin had become widely available by 1944 played no small part in this, drastically reducing the fear of venereal diseases and, by extension, the risk associated with sexual freedom. And speaking of freedom, let's address the elephant in the room: the sexual revolution. Oh yes, the 1960s, a decade defined by free love, miniskirts and rock and roll. But were these just the whims of a rebellious youth? Hardly. The seeds of this social upheaval were sown in the fertile soil of wartime experiences. The exposure to diverse sexual cultures, the breaking of traditional gender roles, and the shift towards a more permissive society all contributed to this explosion of freedom. It was as if the world had been holding its breath during the war, and when the conflict ended, there was a collective exhale. A sigh of relief that manifested in the dismantling of old taboos. Yet not everything was sunshine and liberation. The post-war period also saw the rise of the nuclear family as a societal ideal, a pushback against the perceived moral chaos of wartime. Suburban sprawl and the baby boom heralded a return to traditional values, or at least an attempt at it. But beneath the surface, the undercurrents of change were undeniable. The juxtaposition of the 1950s conservative facade with the simmering desires for personal freedom created a cultural tension that would eventually explode into the social revolutions of the following decades. And as we zoom out to see the bigger picture, we find that the legacy of WW's sexual practices is still very much with us today. The war challenged and redefined societal norms, laying the foundation for ongoing debates about gender, sexuality, and identity. The struggles for equality and sexual freedom that gained momentum in the latter half of the 20th century owe a significant debt to the social shifts initiated during and after the war. It's a reminder that the past is never truly past. It's a living, breathing entity that shapes our present and future. So, what do we take away from all this? That history is a tapestry of contradictions, where the romanticized tales of wartime gallantry exist alongside the gritty realities of human experience. It's a story of power and survival, of societal evolution sparked by the fires of conflict. And as we sift through the remnants of the past, we're left with a deeper understanding of the human condition, of our capacity for both resilience and reinvention. In the end, World War II was more than a conflict of nations. It was a catalyst for change that continues to influence us in ways both profound and subtle. The war reshaped the world, and in doing so, it reshaped us. From the Dear John letters to the pin-up girls, from the black markets to the official brothels, each piece of this complex puzzle tells a story of human nature under pressure. And as we reflect on these tales, we're reminded that history is not just about dates and battles, it's about the people who lived it, in all their flawed, fascinating complexity. So, as we close this chapter, let's carry these lessons forward. Let's remember that the past is not a distant land, but a mirror reflecting who we are and who we might become. And as the echoes of history continue to reverberate through the corridors of time, let's listen closely to what they have to teach us. Because in the end, history is not just about what happened, but about how it shapes the story we're living today. And that, dear friends, is a tale worth telling. In the bustling 12th century Mediterranean crossroads of Ceuta, a young Al-Idrisi was busy dodging camels and navigating the chaotic souks, probably muttering to himself about how he'd give anything for a decent map. Born in 1100, our man Al-Idrisi wasn't your average medieval kid content with building sandcastles. No, he was more interested in the real castles, trade routes, and the endless parade of exotic goods that made Ceuta hum like an over-caffeinated beehive. With its strategic position as a gateway between two continents, Ceuta was like medieval Google. Everything you needed to know was right there, if you knew where to look. Al-Idrisi's early life was marinated in a stew of cultures, ideas, and languages, which might explain why he later became a geography whiz. You see, in a place where traders and travellers swapped more stories than a modern-day Reddit thread, a kid could pick up quite the education just by hanging around the docks. But Al-Idrisi didn't just hang around, he absorbed, inquired, and most importantly, questioned everything. His curiosity was as insatiable as a cat with a laser pointer. Eventually, his quest for knowledge led him to Cordoba, a city so intellectually alive it made today's Silicon Valley look like a snooze fest. Cordoba was the jackpot of learning, boasting libraries that housed hundreds of thousands of manuscripts. And these weren't just dusty old scrolls about how to churn butter. They were texts on philosophy, science, and yes, geography. Imagine a medieval TED Talk on steroids, and you've got the vibe of 12th century Cordoba. Now, you might think Al-Idrisi was drawn to geography because he had a romantic notion of mapping the world. Nope, not at all. The truth is far more relatable. He was just trying not to get lost. In a world without GPS, Google Maps, or even a decent street sign, getting from point A to B could be a real-life episode of Survivor. And let's face it, nobody wanted to be the guy at the market who couldn't find his way back home. Al-Idrisi's educational journey in Cordoba was like being handed a cheat sheet to the universe. He dove into the works of ancient scholars, gleaning wisdom from the likes of Ptolemy, whose maps were about as accurate as a blindfolded dart throw, but still revolutionary for their time. He also picked up on advancements from the Islamic Golden Age, which was all about blending the best of Greek, Persian, and Indian knowledge. Al-Idrisi was like a kid in a candy store, except the candy was ancient manuscripts, and the sugar rush came from intellectual fervour. But it wasn't just books that shaped Al-Idrisi's mind. Cordoba was a melting pot of thinkers, dreamers, and doers. Daily life was a symposium where scholars debated everything from the curvature of the earth to the best way to treat a stubbed toe. Al-Idrisi soaked it all up, sharpening his wit and honing his critical thinking skills. He learned that the earth was round, take that, flat earthers, and that there were lands beyond the horizon waiting to be explored. The young geographer's knack for geography was less about knowing the lay of the land and more about understanding the lay of life. By the time he was ready to leave Cordoba, he had become a cartographer not just of physical spaces, but of ideas. He saw connections where others saw only chaos, and he understood that maps were less about places and more about possibilities. Al-Idrisi's early life and education set the stage for his later achievements. He was primed to become one of history's most famous geographers, all because he wanted to make sure he could find his way home with ease. His story is a reminder that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the simplest of needs. And who knew? Maybe the next time you use your GPS, you might just think of Al-Idrisi, the man who charted the world so we wouldn't have to. Al-Idrisi was ready to make sure we could find our way home with ease, but little did he know the journey from Cordoba was just a warm-up lap. Fast forward to the court of Roger II of Sicily, where things were about to get interesting. Picture this. A king so ambitious he makes Elon Musk look like a weekend hobbyist. Roger II had a vision as grand as his royal persona. He wanted a map of the known world. And who better to hire for this Herculean task than our geography guru, Al-Idrisi? Now, in case you're wondering, mapping the world in the 12th century was not a simple case of asking Siri. It was a logistical nightmare wrapped in a cartographic puzzle. Roger II wasn't just asking for a map, he wanted a masterpiece, a magnum opus of geospatial art, if you will. Picture a celestial globe crafted from pure silver, gleaming with the secrets of the earth. This wasn't just about navigation, it was a status symbol, a medieval flex worthy of an Instagram post, if only the internet existed then. Al-Idrisi accepted this commission with a mix of excitement and a healthy dose of skepticism. After all, translating tales from travellers who often embellished more than a fisherman describing his catch into accurate maps was no small feat. The task was akin to piecing together a jigsaw puzzle where half of the pieces were missing and the other half were possibly fabricated. But hey, what's life without a little challenge? Roger II's court was a vibrant hub of cultures and ideas, much like Ceuta and Cordoba, but with a royal twist. It was here that Al-Idrisi began the colossal task of charting the world. The king provided resources, from access to libraries to an endless parade of sailors, merchants and explorers, each with their own slice of the world to share. And let's not forget the celestial globe itself, estimated at 300 pounds of silver, costing more than a fleet of ships. This was the medieval equivalent of a space mission budget, and Al-Idrisi was the chief scientist in charge. Now, let's talk about those sailors. If you ever thought your uncle's fish stories were exaggerated, you haven't met a 12th century sailor 3 drinks in. These mariners were convinced the earth was flat, and who could blame them? After a few pints of ale, the horizon probably did look like the edge of the world. Al-Idrisi had to balance these tall tales with actual data, a task that required more diplomacy than the UN on a Monday morning. Despite the challenges, Al-Idrisi's work began to take shape, fueled by his relentless curiosity and knack for critical thinking. His approach was methodical, combining first-hand accounts with existing scholarship. But what set him apart was his ability to sift through the noise and find the signal, those nuggets of truth buried in a mountain of myth. If a sailor claimed a sea monster lurked off the coast of Africa, Al-Idrisi would cross-reference it with other reports. If 3 other sailors confirmed it, perhaps there was something to it. If not, well, chalk it up to the ale. Al-Idrisi's work was revolutionary, not just for its accuracy, but for its scope. His maps didn't just depict lands, they interconnected them, creating a network of trade routes, cities and cultures. He understood that geography was as much about economics and politics as it was about physical landscapes. A city wasn't just a dot on the map, it was a hub of commerce, an intersection of cultures and ideas. He saw the world as an intricate web of relationships, a tapestry of humanity. His magnum opus, the Tabula Rogeriana, was completed in 1154, and it wasn't just a map, it was a scholarly achievement that stood the test of time. But like any great work, it was both celebrated and critiqued. Some hailed it as a masterpiece, while others nitpicked its inaccuracies, conveniently ignoring that the man was working with second-hand accounts and zero satellite imagery. In the end, Al-Idrisi didn't just map the world, he expanded it. He took the chaos of rumors and legends and shaped them into something coherent, something usable. His work wasn't perfect, no map ever is, but it was groundbreaking for its time. And as he presented it to Roger II, one can only imagine the king's delight. Here was a work that captured not just the known world, but the ambition of a ruler who dared to dream big. So, the next time you pull up a map on your smartphone, spare a thought for Al-Idrisi. He was the original GPS, navigating a world as uncertain as it was intriguing, one tale at a time. And as we continue to chart our own paths, Maybe there's a lesson in there somewhere about the power of curiosity, the importance of questioning, and the magic of turning the unknown into something known. As Al-Idrisi's celestial globe glittered in the Sicilian sun, it wasn't just a map. It was a testament to human ingenuity and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. And while Roger II might have been the man who commissioned the work, it was Al-Idrisi who truly put the world on the map. As Al-Idrisi's celestial globe glittered in the Sicilian sun, it wasn't just a map. It was a testament to human ingenuity and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. But let's not get too misty-eyed just yet. This was the 12th century, after all, a time when even the most groundbreaking work could be met with a healthy dose of skepticism and side-eye. The Tabula Rogeriana was as much a lightning rod for criticism as it was a beacon of enlightenment. Now, let's talk about the Tabula Rogeriana itself, a name that sounds like it should be a spell from Hogwarts, but is actually one of the most sophisticated maps of the medieval world. Completed in 1154, this wasn't your run-of-the-mill treasure map with an X marking the spot. Al-Idrisi's opus sprawled across 10 sheets of parchment, each teeming with detail. It was like the Netflix of maps. You could spend hours just exploring its intricate network of cities, rivers, and mountain ranges. The map stretched from the Atlantic in the west to the Indian Ocean in the east, an impressive breadth for its time. But let's not pretend it was without its quirks. Al-Idrisi's map famously featured elephants in Rome. Yes, elephants. One has to wonder if Hannibal's infamous elephantine march over the Alps left a lingering impression, or if this was a case of medieval game of telephone gone awry. And let's not forget the dragons and sea monsters peppered across the oceans, perhaps more a nod to the popular imagination than reality. After all, what's a medieval map without a little fantasy? Despite these eccentricities, the map was a triumph in connecting the dots of the known world. Al-Idrisi took the jigsaw puzzle of geographic knowledge and pieced it together with remarkable precision. His work wasn't just about where places were, but how they interconnected, trade routes, cultural exchanges, the ebb and flow of commerce. It was Google Earth with a side of economic strategy. The map made a splash on both sides of the Mediterranean, influencing Islamic and Christian scholars alike. In the Islamic world, it was a validation of their rich tradition of scholarship, a testament to the intellectual cross-pollination that had been thriving since the Abbasid Caliphate. Meanwhile, in the Christian world, it was a revelation. Here was a map that didn't just reinforce European-centric views, but broadened them, challenging scholars to consider a world beyond their borders. Of course, with great achievement comes great critique. Al-Idrisi's opus was dissected like an overzealous lab frog. Armchair critics, with all the expertise of a medieval Yelp reviewer, pounced on its inaccuracies. Elephants in Rome? Preposterous. They'd scoff, conveniently ignoring the fact that their own maps were about as accurate as a weather forecast for Mars. To these critics, Al-Idrisi had a simple retort. Try mapping continents with a stylus and parchment, then get back to me. It's an argument that still resonates today, a gentle reminder that doing is infinitely harder than critiquing. Now, let's put Al-Idrisi's work in context. Sicily, under Roger II, was a melting pot of cultures, a place where Norman, Arab, and Byzantine influences mingled like a potluck dinner gone right. It was a crossroads of knowledge and ideas, and the Tabula Rogeriana was its crowning glory. This wasn't just about mapping geography, it was about mapping the human experience, a tapestry of trade, politics, and culture that stretched across continents. Economically, the map was a game-changer. It provided a blueprint for trade routes, a guide for merchants looking to capitalize on the rich tapestry of commerce that spanned the Mediterranean and beyond. In a world where the economy was as unpredictable as a medieval weather pattern, having a map that outlined the lay of the land was like striking gold. It was more than a tool, it was a roadmap to prosperity. Politically, the map was a statement. In an era when power was as much about perception as reality, Roger II wielded the Tabula Rogeriana like a scepter. It was his declaration to the world. Sicily was not just a player on the stage of history, but a director, orchestrating the interchange of ideas and cultures. His was a reign that embraced the world beyond its borders, a vision that was as vast and intricate as Al-Idrisi's map itself. Socially, the map was a revelation. It challenged the Eurocentric view that had dominated medieval thought, introducing scholars to a world that was as diverse as it was interconnected. It was a wake-up call, a reminder that the world was much larger and more complex than the confines of any single culture or continent. But let's not sugarcoat it, the map had its detractors. Some viewed its inaccuracies as a reflection of the chaos and uncertainty of the time. But Al-Idrisi's work was never about perfection, it was about progress. It was a snapshot of a world in flux, a testament to the idea that knowledge is always evolving, always in motion. So, where does that leave us? With a map that was as much a work of art as it was a scientific achievement. Al-Idrisi took the swirling chaos of the medieval world and imposed upon it a sense of order, a narrative that connected the disparate dots of human civilization. And while the tabula rogeriana may have had its elephants in Rome, it was a reminder that maps are as much about the journey as the destination. As we pull up our own digital maps and GPS systems, let's tip our hats to Al-Idrisi, the man who charted a world as vast and varied as the imagination itself. His work was a reminder of the power of curiosity, the importance of questioning, and the magic of turning the unknown into something known. And maybe, just maybe, there's a lesson in there for all of us, that the world is as large or as small as we choose to make it. As we zoom in on the intrigue of Sicilian court politics, let's just say it wasn't all sunshine and olive groves. No, the court of Roger II was a veritable soap opera, complete with power struggles, diplomatic chess games, and enough drama to make Game of Thrones look like a Sunday picnic. Al-Idrisi found himself right in the middle of this whirlwind, tasked with creating not just a map, but a symbol of Sicily's rising star on the Mediterranean stage. First, let's talk politics. Roger II, the Norman king with a Sicilian throne, wasn't content to sit around polishing his crown. He was on a mission to make Sicily the intellectual and economic hub of the Mediterranean, and in the 12th century that was no small ambition. He needed Al-Idrisi's map not just as a tool for trade, but as a declaration of power. It was a geopolitical flex, a way to say, look at us, we know where everything is, and we're ready to play ball. But here's the thing. The Sicilian court was a melting pot of cultures, like a medieval version of New York City. Normans, Arabs, Greeks and Byzantines all mingled, each bringing their own traditions, languages and culinary preferences. Hummus debates, anyone? This cultural cocktail was both a blessing and a curse. It fueled innovation and intellectual exchange, but it also meant that every decision, every map was scrutinized through a kaleidoscope of perspectives. Economically, Sicily was sitting pretty at the crossroads of major trade routes. Picture it as the 12th century version of a bustling port city, where spices, silks and stories flowed freely. The Mediterranean trade networks were the arteries of this world, pumping wealth and ideas across continents. Al-Idrisi's map was like a GPS for merchants, helping them navigate these waters with precision, or at least, as much precision as you can get when half your compass is a sailor's hunch and the other half a prayer to whatever deity seemed most likely to answer. But let's not romanticize it too much. The trade networks were as cutthroat as a medieval market day, with piracy, storms, and political intrigue lurking just beneath the surface. Merchant ships were the lifelines of the economy, but they also carried the weight of geopolitical tensions. A wrong turn, or an ill-timed storm, could mean the difference between riches and ruin. Now, we can't talk about Al-Idrisi without mentioning the scholarly exchanges that were happening faster than a medieval gossip chain. These weren't your average academic conferences with polite nods and PowerPoint presentations. Nope, scholars from across the Islamic and Christian worlds gathered in Sicily, engaging in debates that were less, let's have a civil discussion, and more, pass the hummus, and I'll tell you why your theory is wrong. These exchanges were the intellectual lifeblood of the time, a crucible where ideas were tested, challenged, and, if they survived, celebrated. Al-Idrisi thrived in this environment, his mind a sponge soaking up the diverse knowledge that surrounded him. But it wasn't all harmonious debates over the finer points of geography. Scholars were fiercely protective of their ideas, and the competition was as intense as a medieval joust. Intellectual property disputes? They've been around longer than you think. In this vibrant yet volatile environment, Al-Idrisi's work was both a testament to and a product of its time. His map wasn't just a static representation of the world, It was a dynamic reflection of the cultural, economic, and political forces at play. He understood that geography was more than lines on parchment. It was the story of human civilization, a narrative woven together by trade, conquest, and curiosity. Yet, for all its grandeur, the Tabula Rogeriana faced its fair share of skepticism. Critics didn't hold back, pointing out its inaccuracies with the zeal of a modern-day fact-checker. And sure, mistakes were made. Who wouldn't slip up when piecing together the world from second-hand sailor tales and ancient texts? But here's the kicker. Al-Idrisi's map wasn't just about getting every detail right. It was about connecting the dots, seeing the bigger picture, and understanding the world as an interconnected web of cultures and economies. Politically, the map served as a tool of diplomacy. Roger II used it to position Sicily as a bridge between the Islamic and Christian worlds, a place where different cultures could come together in pursuit of knowledge and trade. It was a bold move, one that required a deft hand to navigate the intricacies of medieval geopolitics. And Al-Idrisi's map was the perfect instrument for this delicate dance, showcasing Sicily's role as a nexus of cultural and intellectual exchange. The social conditions of the time also played a crucial role in shaping Al-Idrisi's work. The Mediterranean was a tapestry of languages, religions, and traditions, each thread contributing to the rich fabric of medieval life. Al-Idrisi's map captured this diversity, highlighting the myriad ways in which different cultures intersected and influenced one another. It was a reminder that the world was not a series of isolated islands, but a complex network of relationships that transcended borders and boundaries. In the end, Al-Idrisi's map was more than just a geographical tool. It was a symbol of a world in transition, a snapshot of a time when knowledge was expanding and the boundaries of the known world were being pushed ever outward. It was a testament to the power of curiosity and the enduring human desire to explore, understand, and connect. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of it all. The 12th century was a time of great uncertainty, and Al-Idrisi's map was as much a product of its challenges as its triumphs. It was a bold attempt to impose order on a chaotic world, a reminder that even in the face of uncertainty, there is value in striving to understand and chart the unknown. As we leave our medieval Mapmaker and his celestial globe, let's keep in mind that his journey is far from over. The world he mapped was just the beginning, a stepping stone to future discoveries and innovations. And while we've come a long way since Al-Idrisi's day, his story remains a testament to the power of human curiosity and the enduring quest to make sense of the world around us. Stay tuned, because the next chapter in this historical saga promises to be just as enlightening and maybe even a little bit unexpected. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of it all. The 12th century was a time of great uncertainty, and Al-Idrisi's map was as much a product of its challenges as its triumphs. It was a bold attempt to impose order on a chaotic world, a reminder that even in the face of uncertainty, there is value in striving to understand and chart the unknown. So, as we sail into the sunset of Al-Idrisi's tale, it's time to ponder the real legacy of this medieval map wizard. Did he single-handedly change the course of history, or was he just another cog in the relentless wheel of human progress? Well, gather round, history buffs, because the truth is a little bit of both and a whole lot more interesting. First, let's tackle the romanticized portrayal of Al-Idrisi's work, which has been passed down through the ages like a game of historical whisper. Yes, his maps were groundbreaking, like a medieval mic drop, but they weren't the infallible gospel of geography some would have you believe. His Tabula Rogeriana was a bold attempt at mapping the world, but it was more like an artist's impression than a Google Earth screenshot. There were elephants in Rome after all, and let's not even get started on the sea monsters. Yet, the charm of such inaccuracies adds a layer of mystique that has captivated imaginations for centuries. Fast forward to the age of exploration, and Al-Idrisi's influence becomes even more apparent. His maps, with all their quirks and embellishments, served as inspiration for later explorers who dared to venture into the unknown. Imagine being a 15th century sailor, clutching a map that might be only slightly more accurate than a treasure hunter's fever dream, and setting sail for lands unseen. It took a special kind of audacity, or perhaps a lack of better options, to embark on such journeys. Al-Idrisi's work, with its bold strokes and daring guesses, was a testament to the human spirit's relentless pursuit of knowledge, even when the details were a little fuzzy. When Christopher Columbus set off in 1492, he was armed with maps that owed a debt to Al-Idrisi's pioneering spirit. Sure, Columbus initially thought he had landed in Asia, which was a bit of a geographical whoopsie, but the point is, Al-Idrisi's maps laid the groundwork for the Age of Discovery. They were part of the intellectual scaffolding that supported a new era of exploration where cartography was as much about imagination as it was about accuracy. And let's not forget the economic impact of these maps. In a world where trade was the lifeblood of empires, having a map, even one with the odd dragon here and there, was like holding the keys to a kingdom. Al-Idrisi's work outlined trade routes that became the arteries of commerce, connecting continents and cultures in a way that was unprecedented. His maps were not just about where to go, but also what to find when you got there: spices, silks, gold, and the occasional elephant parade. Politically, the enduring influence of Al-Idrisi's maps cannot be overstated. They were used as diplomatic tools, proof that knowledge was power and that Sicily was at the heart of a network that spanned the known world. Roger II's court was a bastion of cultural exchange, and Al-Idrisi's maps were its crowning achievement, showcasing the island's role as a nexus of interaction between the Islamic and Christian worlds. Socially, Al-Idrisi's work was a reminder that the world was a tapestry of cultures, each thread contributing to the rich fabric of human civilization. His maps captured this diversity, offering a glimpse into a world that was far more interconnected than it might have seemed. In a time when the unknown was feared and often mythologized, Al-Idrisi's maps dared to chart it, turning the mysterious into something tangible. But here's the kicker. The real heroism of Al-Idrisi's work wasn't in the perfection of detail. No, the true bravery lay in his audacity to map the unmapped, to sketch the unseen with nothing but a quill and a bit of chutzpah. His legacy is not a tale of flawless execution, but of fearless exploration, of the man who dared to dream big and put ink to parchment in a world where the horizon was both a boundary and a beckoning call. As we bid farewell to Al-Idrisi, let's take a moment to appreciate the broader lesson his story offers. It's about the power of curiosity, the courage to question, and the relentless drive to understand the world around us. Al-Idrisi's maps may have had their quirks, but they were a starting point, a jumping-off place for future generations to build upon. And isn't that what legacy is all about? Not perfection, but progression. Today, as we navigate our world with the ease of digital maps and satellite imagery, it's worth remembering the giants on whose shoulders we stand. Al-Idrisi was one such giant, a visionary whose work reminds us that the journey is just as important as the destination. So the next time you find yourself lost in the labyrinthine streets of a new city, spare a thought for Al-Idrisi, the man who charted the unknown so we could find our way home. In the end, Al-Idrisi's maps were more than just tools for navigation. They were symbols of human ingenuity, of the insatiable thirst for knowledge that drives us ever forward. And while his maps may have had their fair share of elephants and sea monsters, they also held the promise of discovery, the allure of the unknown, and the tantalizing possibility of what lay beyond the horizon. As we close the book on Al-Idrisi's remarkable journey, let's remember that history is not a static record of what was, but a dynamic story of what could be. Al-Idrisi's legacy is a testament to the power of imagination, the courage to chart new paths, and the enduring spirit of exploration that defines us all. So here's to Al-Idrisi, the original mapmaker of dreams, whose work continues to inspire and illuminate the way forward. You crack open your eyes to the dim, smoky haze of a Viking longhouse, the ceiling a maze of wooden beams overhead. The smell of last night's fire still lingers, mingling with the earthy scent of damp wool and the faint tang of salted fish. It's like waking up in a medieval barbecue pit, minus the actual barbecue. Around you, early risers are already chattering, their voices a low hum that bounces off the timbered walls. It's a new day in the 10th century, and you're about to live it as a Viking bard, or skald if you want to get all Old Norse about it. Now, let's get one thing straight right off the bat. Forget the lonely troubadour with a lute, wandering from village to village like some medieval rock star. Reality check. You're more like a human Spotify playlist for your community, carrying stories, history, and a healthy dose of entertainment wherever you go. You're crucial, but you're not exactly rolling in gold coins. Your currency is words. And in a society where oral tradition is king, you're a wealthy soul indeed. As you stretch out on your sheepskin bed, take a moment to appreciate the setup here in the longhouse. It's about 50 feet long, give or take, which is practically a mansion by Viking standards. The walls are woven with wattle and daub, a fancy way of saying sticks and mud, and the roof is a thatch of straw and reeds. Cozy, right? This is the heart of the village, where everyone gathers to eat, sleep, and plot their next raid on some unsuspecting European coastline. You're living in what's basically the Viking equivalent of a shared apartment, minus the Wi-Fi, but with a whole lot more axes. You might be wondering where you fit into this bustling Norse ecosystem. Bards like you are the keepers of sagas and skalds' poetry, tasked with preserving the heroic deeds and the not-so-heroic blunders of the community. You're like a living archive, but with a better sense of humour. Your job is to entertain, sure, but you also teach, inform, and keep everyone's spirits up when the North Sea storms blow a little too hard. You're part performance artist, part historian, and part therapist, all rolled into one. Social structure here is as layered as an onion and just as likely to make you cry if you don't peel it right. At the top, you've got the chieftains, the big shots who call the shots. Below them are the warriors and farmers, the backbone of the society, doing the dirty work while dreaming of glory and gold. Then there are the thralls, the slaves who, let's face it, get the worst deal. No glory, just a lot of hard labour. As a skald, you float somewhere in the middle, respected for your talent and your mouth, which is your greatest weapon. Forget swords and shields, you've got alliteration and metaphor at your disposal. But let's not polish this saga with too much romanticism. Sure, there's something appealing about the image of the lone bard strumming away at the heartstrings of the village. But the truth is, you're a social creature, thriving in the company of others and dependent on the goodwill of the community for your survival. You're as much a part of the village as the blacksmith or the brewer, and arguably just as essential. Without you, who would remind everyone of their ancestors' glorious deeds or the epic fails that make for the best stories? As you roll out of bed, you're greeted by the sight of embers still glowing in the central hearth, the heart of the longhouse, where cooking, storytelling, and the occasional brawl take place. It's a multifunctional space, much like your role in the village. Here, meals are cooked, tales are spun, and disputes are settled, often with you playing the part of mediator or instigator, depending on your mood. Today, like every day, you'll weave your way through the intricate tapestry of life in your Viking community. You'll exchange tales with fellow bards, perhaps learn a new verse or two to add to your repertoire. You'll perform for the chieftain's hall later, where your words might earn you a hearty meal, or at least a cup of ale. If you're lucky, you might even get a new cloak or some shiny arm rings, the Viking equivalent of a 5-star review. But for now, it's enough to soak in the morning's quiet chaos, knowing that your stories will carry the weight of history and the lightness of a good joke, because in the end, whether you're recounting the exploits of Thor or the latest village gossip, your words are what keep the fires of memory burning brightly in the minds of those around you. And that, dear Skald, is a power worth waking up for. With the morning's quiet chaos still swirling around you, you gather your wits and your wits' end, ready to dive into the heartbeat of Viking society, the marketplace. It's a hubbub of activity, where the air buzzes with the kind of energy that only comes when people are trading everything from the mundane to the exotic. And let's face it, in a world where you can make or break a fortune on the back of a walrus tusk, the stakes are higher than the chieftain's new longship mast. The marketplace is where the economic magic happens, a place where you can almost smell the future, or is that just the reek of dried fish? Either way, it's a scene straight out of a Norse saga, minus the dragons, but with a whole lot more haggling. Here, traders from as far afield as the Byzantine Empire and the Abbasid Caliphate rub elbows with locals, their ships brimming with goods that tell stories as rich as any skald's verse. Now, let's talk currency, or the lack thereof. Forget coins jingling in your pouch. The Vikings were all about the barter system, trading one good for another, with hacksilver often serving as a makeshift currency. Hacksilver, if you're wondering, is just silver cut into pieces. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of breaking a 20, only with more sharp edges and fewer convenience stores. This wasn't just a local quirk, it was a smart way to do business when dealing with traders who spoke a different language or came from a place where the silver coin might be as foreign as a polar bear in Baghdad. As you wander through this vibrant bazaar, you can't help but be impressed by the sheer variety of goods on display. Furs from the Arctic, silks from the East, amber from the Baltic, and even slaves from across Europe, an unfortunate but undeniable part of the trade. The Vikings might have a rap for being ruthless raiders, but they were also shrewd traders who had a keen eye for profit. This wasn't just about pillaging. It was about making connections and building networks that stretched from North America to Baghdad. Yes, you heard that right, North America. Long before Columbus got lost looking for India, the Vikings had already set foot in what we now call Newfoundland, Canada. They called it Vinland, and while the settlement didn't last, it was a testament to their adventurous spirit and relentless quest for new markets. Forget the stereotype of the Viking as a helmeted brute with an axe. Think of them as the entrepreneurs of their age, always on the lookout for the next big thing. And let's not forget the slaves, or thralls, as they were called. It's a grim reality, but in a society where social mobility was about as likely as finding an ice-free fjord in January, thralls were a commodity like any other. Captured during raids or traded for goods, they were a stark reminder that the Viking world wasn't all mead halls and epic feasts. Yet, for the Vikings, this was just business. A harsh business, but business nonetheless. As you maneuver through the throng, you'll notice the soundscape is just as varied as the wares. The clatter of goods being unloaded from ships, the drone of traders haggling over prices, and occasionally the melodic twang of a lyre as a fellow bard tries to earn his supper by serenading shoppers with tales of Odin's latest escapades. It's a cacophony that's both overwhelming and exhilarating, a testament to the bustling economic lifeblood that keeps this society ticking. In this melee of material exchange, you can almost see the invisible threads linking this Nordic village to the rest of the world. Those threads might be spun from silk or forged from iron, but they're as strong as the bonds of kinship that hold the community together. It's a web of trade routes that would make any modern logistics manager weep with envy. From spices to swords, the Vikings had their fingers in many pies, and they weren't above adding a little extra spice to the mix when the opportunity arose. And speaking of opportunities, you might even chance upon a bit of gossip that's as valuable as any trinket. After all, information is a currency of its own, and a savvy skald knows how to spin a tale out of a single whispered rumour. Who needs silver when you can trade in secrets and stories? But let's not get carried away with romanticizing this bustling scene. Behind the exotic goods and the bustling activity lies a harsher reality. The marketplace is also a place of inequality and power struggles, where the wealthy merchants can make or break a trader's fortune with a single deal. It's a cutthroat world, where the spoils often go to those with the sharpest wits and the deepest pockets. In a society where reputation is everything, a single bad deal can leave you as vulnerable as a ship without a rudder. Yet, for all its flaws, the marketplace is a microcosm of the Viking world, reflecting both its strengths and its weaknesses. It's a place where cultures collide, where languages mix, and where the past and future meet in a whirl of activity. And as you wander through this vibrant tapestry, you can't help but feel a sense of awe at the sheer scope of it all. So, as you take in the sights, sounds, and smells of this bustling hub, remember that you're not just a spectator in this grand drama. You're a part of it, a thread in the fabric of Viking society, weaving your own stories into the rich tapestry of history. And who knows? Maybe one day your tales will be traded alongside the silks and spices, a testament to the enduring power of words in a world driven by commerce and conquest. As you wrap up your tour of the market, it's time to head back to the village, your mind buzzing with new stories and ideas. The day may be drawing to a close, but for a skald like you, the night is just beginning. There are tales to tell, songs to sing, and perhaps a little mischief to be made. After all, in a world where every day is an adventure, there's always another story waiting to be told. As you meander back to the village, the buzz of the market still humming in your ears, you're reminded that the real action's about to take place at the Thing. No, not some mystical artifact or ominous creature from a fantasy novel. The Thing is the Viking assembly, the beating political heart of Norse society. Imagine a blend of a town hall meeting and a legal showdown, with a dash of open-air theatre and a smidge of chaos thrown in for good measure. Gathered under the vast open sky, this is where the Vikings flex their democratic muscles. Yes, you heard that right. The Vikings might have a reputation for pillaging and plundering, but when it came to governance, these guys were more about consensus than conquest. Think of the Thing as the original people's court, where everyone from the mighty chieftains to the lowliest farmers had a say. Forget the idea that Vikings were all about brute force. Here, words were weapons and rhetoric was king. The Thing was held at a designated assembly field, typically chosen for its central location and expansive views. Picture a grassy amphitheatre, minus the Roman gladiators and with more fur cloaks. Participants would gather from miles around, travelling for days just to have their voices heard. The local Thing might convene several times a year, while the Althing, think of it as the Viking Parliament, was an annual event, drawing folks from across the region to hash out issues big and small. Now, let's talk legal systems. In a world where writing was as rare as a snow-free winter in Norway, Viking laws were recited from memory. Enter the law speaker, the human hard drive of the Viking Age. These guys were chosen for their sharp minds and sharper tongues, responsible for reciting the law word for word from memory. Miss a line, and you'd have a gaggle of bearded hecklers ready to correct you. Laws covered everything from property disputes to marriage contracts, and even the rules of raiding. Yes, even pillaging had a code of conduct. The Thing was where disputes were aired and settled, often with the whole community weighing in. Forget the courtroom drama of today. This was more like a public roast, with the law speaker playing judge, jury, and occasionally stand-up comic. And if you thought things couldn't get any more democratic, consider this. Anyone could propose a new law or challenge an existing one. Sure, chieftains wielded influence, but they couldn't just steamroll the process. It was all about debate and consensus, with decisions made by a show of hands or, in some cases, by throwing up a sword to vote. It's a bit like raising your hand in class, just with a lot more potential for limb loss. But before you get too misty-eyed about Viking egalitarianism, remember that not everyone had a seat at this open-air parliament. Thralls, women, and foreigners were largely excluded from the decision-making process. The Vikings might have been ahead of their time in some ways, but they were still very much a product of their era, with all the social stratification that entails. Now, let's address the elephant, or perhaps the longship, in the room, the idea of Vikings as lawless marauders. Sure, they had a penchant for raiding, but they also had a structured legal system that ensured disputes were settled with words rather than swords. The Thing was a place where justice was meted out, where community decisions were made, and where, occasionally, a good old-fashioned grudge match was resolved. Speaking of which, the Thing could get a bit rowdy. With so many opinions flying around, tempers flared and voices rose. It wasn't unheard of for a heated debate to end in a brawl, but that was all part of the process. The Thing was a crucible of Viking society, where the heat of argument forged the steel of consensus. And let's not forget the social aspect. The Thing was as much about networking and socializing as it was about lawmaking. Picture a medieval LinkedIn meetup, where alliances were forged, marriages arranged, and rivalries kindled. It was a chance for skalds like you to shine, spinning tales of past glories or crafting clever verses that might sway a decision or lighten the mood. But beneath the camaraderie and the clamour lay the serious business of governance. This was where the fate of the community was decided, where laws were crafted to keep society ticking over smoothly. The Thing was a testament to the Vikings' belief in the power of words and the importance of community. It was democracy in its rawest, most organic form. A loud, messy, and undeniably human affair. As the assembly draws to a close, you can feel the weight of history in the air, the echo of ancient voices still resonating across the centuries. The Thing was more than just a meeting. It was the embodiment of Viking society, a living, breathing testament to their commitment to law, order, and collective decision-making. So, as you make your way back to the village, the sun setting on another day in the life of a Viking bard, remember that you're part of a tradition that values words as much as deeds, and consensus as much as conquest, and for a skald like you, that's something worth singing about. As you stroll back to the village, the sun dipping low like a slow-motion finale, you're acutely aware that the real show is about to begin. Yep, it's feast prep time, and if you think Vikings only knew their way around a battlefield, prepare to have your horned helmet blown off. These folks could whip up a banquet that would make a medieval Michelin inspector swoon. First, let's tackle the myth that all Vikings ate was charred meat and chugged ale like frat boys at a tailgate. The reality? Vikings were culinary maestros, and their feasts were as much about finesse as they were about quantity. Let's start with the menu. You're looking at a spread featuring hearty stews full of whatever the local terrain offered, wild game, fish, root vegetables, and if luck smiled, a bit of imported spice. Imagine a pot bubbling away with flavours as complex as a Norse saga, minus the dragons but with a fair bit of dill. And then there's the bread. Forget about your supermarket loaf. Viking bread was a dense, fibrous affair loaded with grains like barley and oats. It might not win any awards for fluffiness, but it was nutritious enough to fuel a long day of rowing or raiding, whichever came first. Plus, it doubled as a handy weapon if dinner conversation got out of hand. Now, let's talk fermented beverages. The Viking equivalent of a social lubricant. Mead was the star of the show, a heady concoction of honey, water, and yeast that was both drink and divine offering. This was no casual sipping drink. Mead was meant to be shared, its golden depths a reflection of Viking hospitality. In a world where water could be as risky as a solo trip to the local thing, mead was the safer and tastier bet. And let's not forget ale, the everyday drink of choice, brewed from barley and sometimes flavoured with local herbs. It was less about getting hammered and more about staying hydrated, though, let's be honest, the line was often blurred. As you wander past the longhouses, you can smell the preparations kicking into high gear. Smoke drifts lazily from chimney holes, the air rich with the scent of roasting meat and stewing vegetables. Vikings didn't have refrigeration, so smoking and salting were the go-to methods for preserving food. This culinary innovation kept the community well fed during those long dark winters when the sun took a sabbatical. But a feast wasn't just about stuffing your face. This was social glue in action. Feasting reinforced bonds, celebrated alliances, and sometimes even brokered peace. It was like a culinary TED talk with less tech and more tunics. Everyone from chieftains to thralls got involved, each with a role to play, some cooking, some serving, and others performing the all-important task of tasting. And then there's you, the skald, ready to spin tales and keep spirits high as the evening unfolds. Your role is crucial. Storytelling isn't a side dish here, it's the main course. A good tale can turn a simple meal into a banquet, transporting listeners to worlds where gods walked the earth and heroes battled monsters. In a society where literacy was as rare as a summer snowstorm, your words painted pictures more vivid than any saga etched in stone. Picture this. As the sun sets and torches flicker to life, the feast begins in earnest. Platters of food are passed around, horns are raised, and laughter echoes through the hall. It's a cacophony of camaraderie, a celebration of life and survival. Vikings might have had a rep for being unsophisticated brutes, but when it came to music and poetry, they were as cultured as any courtly troubadour. Instruments like the lyre and the lure accompanied your tales, their melodies weaving through the air like threads of a tapestry. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Contrary to popular belief, Vikings didn't wear horned helmets, but they did know how to accessorize a feast. The evening would often feature the exchange of gifts, arm rings, weapons, and sometimes even land. These weren't just tokens of wealth. They were symbols of status and loyalty, binding the community together like a well-told verse. And speaking of community, let's debunk another myth. The idea that Viking society was all about might making right. While strength was revered, so were wit and wisdom. Your tales, whether of the gods' antics or the latest village drama, served as moral compasses, teaching lessons with humour and heart. It's a balancing act, keeping the crowd entertained and enlightened, but that's where your true skill as a skald shines brightest. As the night wears on, the feast becomes a blur of laughter, song, and storytelling. It's a living, breathing testament to the Viking spirit, a celebration of the ties that bind a community together. And as you deliver your final tale, the firelight casting flickering shadows on the walls, you realize that in this moment, you're not just recounting history, you're making it. The evening's revelry is a reminder that while the Vikings were fierce warriors, they were also poets, musicians, and chefs of no small talent. They embraced life in all its chaos and beauty, their feasts a microcosm of their world. So next time someone tries to tell you Vikings were just marauding barbarians, raise your horn of mead and toast to the intricacies of a culture that knew how to feast on life as richly as they did on roast boar. As the final embers of the evening's fire die down, leaving a warm glow in their wake, you know that this is only the beginning. There are more stories to tell, more songs to sing, and more feasts to prepare. But for tonight, as you lie back and let the sounds of the longhouse lull you to sleep, you're content in the knowledge that you've played your part in keeping the spirit of the Vikings alive. After all, in a world where words have the power to shape history, a skull's work is never truly done. Just as your eyelids start to droop, the rhythmic crackle of the remaining embers provides a gentle lullaby, but hey, don't nod off just yet. There's a whole world of Viking bedtime stories and end-of-day rituals still to explore, and they're more enlightening than a glow-in-the-dark runestone. For the Vikings, the end of the day wasn't just a time to rest weary bones, it was a chance to commune with the gods, reflect on the day's events, and weave the fabric of their oral traditions even tighter. As the hall settles into a comfortable murmur, you can practically hear the whispers of the Norse gods echoing in the rafters. Now these gods weren't the distant, aloof types watching from some heavenly bleachers. Nope. They were like the ultimate celebrity ensemble cast, each with their own quirks and storylines. Odin, the one-eyed chief, was the god of wisdom, poetry, and war, which, let's be honest, is quite the trifecta. Then there's Thor, the hammer-wielding brawler who doubles as the god of thunder and sky, a walking, talking Norse weather app, if you will. And let's not forget Loki, the trickster who could give modern-day pranksters a run for their money. The Vikings' spiritual beliefs were as layered as a seven-layer dip, and just as essential to their way of life. You see, the Norse pantheon wasn't just a rogues' gallery of supernatural beings, it was a reflection of the very human traits and struggles the Vikings faced. Forget the sanitized, one-dimensional portrayals you might have seen in pop culture. These deities were complex, flawed, and as relatable as your favorite binge-worthy TV drama. Before catching some well-earned shut-eye, the Vikings often engaged in rituals that connected them to these divine figures. Offerings were made, sometimes as grand as a sacrificial feast or as simple as a carved token. These acts weren't just about appeasement, they were a way to seek guidance, protection, and, let's face it, a little divine intervention wouldn't hurt when your day job involves dodging axes. And speaking of intervention, let's talk about the real MVPs of Viking society, the oral traditions. In a world where the written word was about as common as a snow-free fjord, storytelling was the ultimate medium. Bards like you were the memory keepers, the ones who ensured that the sagas of yore didn't fade into the misty abyss of forgetfulness. Your stories were the social glue, the Netflix of the Viking Age, keeping folk entertained and informed while reinforcing community values. Let's pause for a moment to bust a myth wider than a Viking longship. Contrary to popular belief, these tales weren't just testosterone-fueled chronicles of blood and conquest. Sure, there were epic battles and heroic deeds, but there were also tales of love, betrayal, and the occasional comedic misadventure. The point was to teach, to inspire, and yes, to entertain. Because let's face it, who doesn't love a good yarn that leaves you both wiser and with a chuckle? As you reflect on the day, you start to appreciate the role of these stories in preserving history. They're not just bedtime tales, they're cultural lifelines, oral tapestries woven with threads of truth, myth, and moral lessons. In each saga lies a kernel of historical reality, albeit dressed up in dramatic flair. Your job as a skald is to balance the allure of fiction with the weight of fact, to remind your audience that while the gods may play dice with the universe, it's the stories of mortals that truly endure. Now, let's fast forward a few centuries to see how all this has played out. The image of Vikings has been shaped by 1,000 years of retelling through medieval chronicles, romanticized 19th century literature, and, more recently, blockbuster films and TV shows. These portrayals often lean heavily on the horned helmet stereotype, despite the fact that there's about as much evidence for Viking horns as there is for unicorns. But who can blame folks for clinging to such vivid imagery? It's compelling, it's dramatic, and it sells. Yet, as you've experienced firsthand, the reality of Viking life was a tapestry of contradictions. Fierce warriors, yes, but also traders, explorers, and cultural sponges who absorbed and adapted influences from every corner of the world they touched. They were a people defined as much by their storytelling as by their swords, a nuance often lost in the simplified narratives of history. So, as you lay back on your sheepskin bed, the longhouse's timbered roof stretching above you like a protective canopy, you can't help but marvel at the complex legacy of the Vikings. Their tales of gods and heroes, of epic feasts and solemn rituals, have transcended time, leaving an indelible mark on the cultural consciousness. And while the modern world may sometimes reduce them to caricatures of pillaging brutes, the truth is far more fascinating and far more human. In the quiet of the night, with only the low crackle of dying embers for company, you realize that as a skald, you've played your part in this grand narrative. You've kept the stories alive, passed them on from one generation to the next, and ensured that the lessons of the past continue to resonate in the present. It's a legacy as enduring as the great Norse sagas themselves, a reminder that in a world of fleeting moments, it's the stories we tell that truly last. So there you have it, dear skald. As the stars twinkle above like ancient runes etched across the sky, you drift off to sleep, content in the knowledge that tomorrow will bring more tales to tell, more songs to sing, and perhaps a little more of that mead to sample. Because in the end, whether by word or by deed, the spirit of the Vikings lives on, woven into the very fabric of the stories you hold dear. If you squint hard enough, Tenochtitlan might look like a fever dream sprung from a city planner's most ambitious nightmare. A city built smack dab in the middle of a lake? Bold move, Aztecs. This bustling metropolis was the beating heart of the Aztec Empire, a place where you could sail to work if the mood struck you. Birthed in 1325, it was a marvel of engineering long before anyone pondered putting a man on the moon. By the time the Spaniards swaggered in during the early 16th century, Tenochtitlan was a sprawling, vibrant hub with a population of around 200,000, about the same as Paris, which was really saying something back in the day. The Aztecs didn't just stop at building a city on water, they were also pros at empire building. By the early 16th century, the Aztec Empire stretched its muscles across most of Mesoamerica, gobbling up territories like a particularly ambitious game of Risk. Their empire was a patchwork of city-states, each ruled by its own local lord, but all paying homage to the Aztec emperor. This rapid expansion wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, or, should we say, cocoa beans and maize. It was a game of power, politics, and, yes, the occasional ritual sacrifice. So, why did these folks, who clearly had a knack for expansion, bother with fortifications? Well, when you're sitting on prime real estate like Tenochtitlan and ruling over an empire full of folks who aren't exactly thrilled to be under your thumb, fortifications start to look pretty appealing. The Aztecs were not naive. They knew that keeping what you have is just as important as getting more. They also understood that a strategically placed wall could mean the difference between a flourishing city and one that's been ransacked by your less than friendly neighbors. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty of these fortifications. The Aztecs weren't just building walls and hoping for the best. They were methodical, employing techniques that would make even the most meticulous medieval mason nod in approval. Take the causeways, for instance. These weren't your average dirt paths. They were wide, stone-paved roads that connected Tenochtitlan to the mainland, complete with drawbridges that could be pulled up faster than you can say, invading army. And then there were the walls themselves. The Aztecs constructed fortifications around their city-states with an eye for detail that would make a Swiss watchmaker blush. These weren't just barriers, they were statements. The walls were often built in layers, with the outermost layer made from sturdy materials like adobe bricks, while the inner layers were packed with rubble and mud. This multi-layered construction was not only practical but also a clear message to any would-be invaders. Good luck getting through this. Of course, the Aztecs were also savvy enough to know that fortifications alone couldn't hold an empire together. It was a delicate balance of fear and diplomacy with a dash of divine intervention for good measure. The Aztecs believed that their gods had a vested interest in their success, and keeping the deities appeased with the occasional human sacrifice was just part of the job description for an Aztec ruler. Not to mention, keeping the gods on your side was a great way to motivate your troops and keep the populace in line. Economically, the Aztec Empire was a powerhouse. The tribute system they established with conquered territories ensured a steady flow of goods into Tenochtitlan. We're talking everything from foodstuffs like maize and beans to luxury items like feathers and precious stones. This influx of resources not only supported a burgeoning population, but also allowed for the construction and maintenance of those aforementioned fortifications. Because, let's be real, a wall doesn't pay for itself. Politically, the Aztecs were as sophisticated as they were ruthless. The emperor, or Huitotoni, wasn't just a figurehead, he was a military leader, a religious figure, and a politician all rolled into one. This meant that maintaining power was a constant balancing act of alliances, marriages, and, occasionally, a good old-fashioned war. The Aztecs were masters of statecraft, employing spies and informants to keep tabs on potential threats both within and outside their empire. Now, let's debunk a few myths, shall we? It's easy to romanticize the Aztecs as a civilization obsessed with war and sacrifice, but the reality was far more nuanced. Yes, they were warriors, and yes, they did practice human sacrifice, but they were also farmers, traders, and engineers. Their society was rich and complex, with a deep appreciation for the arts and a knack for governance that rivaled their European contemporaries. The Aztecs' strategic use of fortifications was not just about keeping enemies out, it was about creating an environment where their civilization could flourish. They understood that a strong defense was the backbone of a strong empire, and they weren't afraid to invest in that security. The walls of their cities were more than just physical barriers. They were symbols of power and permanence in a world where both were often fleeting. So next time you think about the Aztecs, don't just picture warriors and temples. Remember the engineers and planners who turned a lake into a metropolis, who built an empire with walls that could tell stories of triumph and tenacity. Because in the end, the strength of a civilization isn't just measured by its conquests, but by the legacy it leaves behind in stone and story. And speaking of legacies, let's get into the nitty-gritty of how those Aztec fortifications came to be without the modern conveniences we take for granted today. Like concrete trucks, cranes, or even the humble wheel. Yep, you heard that right. The Aztecs moved massive stones without so much as a single wheel to ease the burden. This wasn't some macho display of brute strength, it was sheer ingenuity fueled by necessity. First, let's talk materials. The Aztecs had a knack for turning the ordinary into the extraordinary, and stones were their bread and butter. They primarily used basalt and tzontl, two types of volcanic rock that were as prevalent in the Valley of Mexico as food trucks in downtown Austin. Tzontl, with its reddish hue, was particularly favored for its lightweight yet sturdy nature, making it the perfect candidate for the outer layers of their fortifications. Basalt, on the other hand, was the tough guy of the bunch, utilized for its durability and strength. Think of it as the original heavy-duty construction material minus the steel reinforcement. Now, picture this. You're an Aztec laborer tasked with moving a hefty chunk of basalt from a quarry miles away to the construction site. Without wheels, you'd think they'd be stumped, but not our Aztec friends. They devised an ingenious system of sleds and log rollers, a technique that would make even the most seasoned IKEA furniture assembler tip their hat in respect. It was all about leveraging the landscape to their advantage. The logs would roll the sled across the terrain, reducing friction and making the process smoother than a late-night jazz session. But wait, there's more. The Aztecs were masters of environmental adaptation. They didn't just plot their city in the middle of a lake for the fun of it. The surrounding water acted as both a natural moat and a highway for transporting materials. Canoes laden with tzontl and basalt navigated the waterways with the precision of a synchronized swimming team, turning what could have been a logistical nightmare into a streamlined supply chain. Talk about thinking outside the box. Or, in this case, the boat. Now, let's get down to the economics of it all. Building fortifications on this grand scale wasn't just a matter of manpower, it required an intricate economic machine. Enter the tribute system. You see, the Aztecs were not just warriors, they were shrewd economists. Conquered city-states were required to pay tribute, and this wasn't just a polite request. We're talking about a well-oiled machine that kept the empire's coffers brimming with resources. From cacao beans to textiles, the tribute system ensured a steady influx of goods which, in turn, funded these monumental construction projects. Consider it an ancient precursor to crowdfunding, minus the Kickstarter rewards. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing, or paddling in this case. Managing such a vast empire meant juggling a complex web of alliances and resentments. While the tribute system was a boon for Tenochtitlan, it was a bone of contention for the tributary states. This constant push-pull dynamic kept the Aztec leadership on their toes. They had to ensure that their fortifications not only stood as a bulwark against external threats, but also as a reminder of their power to their own subjects. Now, let's tackle one of the juiciest myths surrounding Aztec construction: human sacrifice as part of the building process. It's a tantalizing tale, conjuring images of blood-soaked altars and frenzied priests. But here's the deal. While the Aztecs were no strangers to sacrifice, the idea that they tossed a few humans into the foundation mix for good measure is more fiction than fact. Sure, sacrifices were made to appease the gods and ensure the success of their endeavors, but the rocks didn't demand blood. They needed manpower, logistics, and a healthy dose of architectural savvy. The real magic of Aztec construction lay in their ability to blend form with function. Their fortifications weren't just massive stone barriers, they were intricately designed structures that harmonized with the natural landscape. Take the causeways again. These weren't merely roads, they were lifelines that connected the city to the mainland. In times of peace, they facilitated trade and movement. In times of war, they could be transformed into formidable defenses, with sections designed to be flooded or destroyed to thwart advancing enemies. It's this dual-purpose design that underscores the brilliance of Aztec engineering. They understood that a wall was more than a wall. It was a statement of intent. It was this foresight and adaptability that allowed them to maintain control over their sprawling empire for as long as they did. And let's not forget the aesthetic touch. Aztec architecture was as much about beauty as it was about brawn. Their structures were adorned with intricate carvings, vibrant murals, and symbolic motifs, all serving to reinforce the cultural and spiritual significance of their civilization. So, as we delve deeper into the world of Aztec fortifications, let's remember that every stone laid was a testament to their resilience and ingenuity. The Aztecs were more than just warriors and priests. They were visionaries who left an indelible mark on history. Their fortifications were not just barriers against the world, but statements of their enduring legacy. And as we continue to explore their methods and materials, we'll uncover even more layers of this fascinating civilization. Stay tuned for the next chapter in our journey through the Aztec Empire. Now, as we dig deeper into the Aztec world, it's time to peek behind the curtain and see who was actually doing all this heavy lifting. The Aztec fortifications didn't just miraculously appear one day, conjured from thin air by some ancient HGTV host. Nope, they were the result of a well-oiled societal machine, with each cog playing its part in the grand design. At the top of the heap sat the Tlatoani, the Aztec rulers, who were like the CEOs of this sprawling construction company we call an empire. These guys were more than just figureheads with fancy feathered hats. The Tlatoani were the ultimate multitaskers, balancing the roles of military tactician, spiritual leader, and political strategist. They were the ones who decided where and when to build those formidable walls, and let's be honest, they probably didn't lift a finger themselves, unless it was to point and give orders. Now, before you start picturing these rulers lounging around like some ancient version of a corporate fat cat, remember that their power came with high stakes. In the cutthroat world of Aztec politics, one wrong move could land you in a bit of hot water, or, more literally, on the sacrificial altar. The Tlatoani had to keep everyone in line, from the nobility to the common folk. And how did they manage that? Well, fortifications weren't just about keeping enemies out. They were also a constant visual reminder of the ruler's strength and the state's stability. Speaking of the common folk, let's give a nod to the unsung heroes of this architectural saga, the labourers. These were the people who got their hands dirty, quite literally, hauling stones and building walls without a single power tool in sight. The workforce was a mixed bag, consisting of skilled artisans, farmers drafted for seasonal work, and even prisoners of war, because nothing says "thank you for your service" like a few years of hard labour. The labour system was a finely tuned hierarchy, with each worker knowing their place. Skilled craftsmen, known as kalpixka, were the rock stars of the construction scene, overseeing the work and making sure no stone was left unturned, again, quite literally. Below them, the common labourers were often organised into kalpuli, or neighbourhood groups, which functioned like construction crews. It was a communal effort, with each kalpuli responsible for a section of the project, fostering a sense of camaraderie and, no doubt, a bit of healthy competition. But here's where things get really interesting. These massive construction projects weren't just about flexing military muscle or showcasing architectural prowess. They were also a clever way of reinforcing social order. By involving the populace in the construction of these fortifications, the rulers were ensuring that everyone had a stake in the empire's security. It was a brilliant bit of social engineering, making the walls not just a physical barrier, but a metaphorical one as well, separating the haves from the have-nots while simultaneously keeping the whole system ticking like a well-oiled machine. And while we're on the topic of social engineering, let's pause for a moment to appreciate the savvy urban planning that went into these fortifications. The Aztec rulers understood the importance of a good layout. They were the ultimate city planners long before anyone coined the term. The strategic placement of walls and causeways wasn't just about defense, it was about controlling the flow of goods and people, ensuring that the bustling heart of Tenochtitlan remained the epicenter of Aztec life. The city's layout was a chessboard of control, with each piece strategically placed to maximize efficiency and minimize rebellion. Now, let's tackle one of the biggest myths surrounding these constructions, that they were solely for military purposes. Sure, they were great for keeping out marauding neighbors, but they also served as a stage for the Aztec elite to showcase their power and wealth. It was a bit like building the most impressive skyscraper on the block, not just to dominate the skyline, but to remind everyone who really ran the show. These fortifications were also about making a statement to the gods. The Aztecs were deeply spiritual, and they believed that their gods had a vested interest in the empire's success. By building grand structures, they were demonstrating their devotion and ensuring divine favor. It was a bit like cosmic insurance. Make the gods happy, and they'll keep your enemies at bay. Not a bad deal, all things considered. But let's not forget the economic aspect of these fortifications. Building them wasn't cheap, and it required a steady influx of resources. This is where the tribute system came into play once again, proving that the Aztecs were not just savvy warriors but also shrewd economists. The constant flow of goods from conquered territories ensured that there was always enough material to keep the construction going. It was a delicate balance of give and take, with the Aztec rulers playing the role of master puppeteers, pulling the strings of their vast empire to keep everything in harmony. In essence, the fortifications of the Aztecs were more than just a collection of stones and mortar. They were a testament to the power dynamics at play within the empire, a physical embodiment of the social hierarchy that kept the whole thing running smoothly. The walls were not just about keeping the outside world at bay, they were about maintaining order within, reinforcing the status quo, and ensuring that everyone knew their place in the grand scheme of things. So, as we continue our journey through the world of the Aztecs, let's remember that these fortifications were more than just barriers against invasion. They were a reflection of the society that built them, a society that was as complex as it was resilient. And as we explore further, we'll uncover even more layers of this fascinating civilization. Stay tuned for the next chapter in our journey through the Aztec Empire. Now, as we shift our focus from the stone and mortar of Aztec fortifications to the flesh and blood of their military strategies, let's dive into the heart of the action, the battles themselves. The ones where those impregnable walls weren't just decorative stonework, but key players in a high-stakes chess match of life and death. The Aztecs, ever the resourceful strategists, understood that a wall is only as good as the men defending it and the tactics employed. So, buckle up, because we're about to unravel the battlefield genius that made the Aztecs a formidable force in Mesoamerica. Let's start with the Battle of Otumba in 1520, a showdown that reads like a Hollywood epic minus the CGI. Picture this: Hernán Cortés and his crew of conquistadors, fresh off a narrow escape from Tenochtitlan, thanks to a daring nighttime retreat known as La Noche Trista, were limping their way across the Mexican landscape. Their aim? To regroup and reinforce, but first they had to make it past the Aztec forces hot on their heels. Enter Otumba. The Aztecs, sensing victory, amassed their warriors for a final blow. Now, here's where the Aztec tactical playbook got interesting. Unlike a Hollywood script where the hero always wins, the Aztecs had the upper hand. They surrounded the Spaniards, using their numerical superiority and the terrain to their advantage. The battlefield was a sea of Aztec warriors, well aware that the Spanish armor and horses gave them a technological edge. So, what did the Aztecs do? They went for the jugular, literally and figuratively. Aztec warriors were trained to capture rather than kill, a strategy born from their ritualistic culture where captives were more valuable than corpses. But when it came to the Spanish, they adapted. With slashing obsidian blades and a relentless barrage of arrows, they aimed to overwhelm their enemy. However, here's the kicker. The Aztecs didn't count on Cortez's sheer audacity. In a move that would make any action hero proud, he and his men charged directly at the Aztec command structure, specifically targeting the standard-bearer. The psychological impact was devastating. The Aztec forces, momentarily leaderless, faltered. While the Aztecs had the strategic positioning and numbers, Cortez's gamble paid off, turning a potential rout into a retreat. The lesson here? Even the best-laid plans can crumble under the weight of a single bold move. The Aztecs learned that while walls and numbers are crucial, adaptability and quick decision-making can turn the tide. But the Aztecs weren't just about brute force. They were masters of psychological warfare, using their fortifications not just as physical barriers, but as psychological tools. Take the siege of Tenochtitlan in 1521. Cortez returned with a vengeance, this time with reinforcements and indigenous allies who had their own scores to settle against the Aztecs. The city, once a symbol of Aztec might, became a trap for its defenders. The Aztecs employed a strategy of attrition, using their knowledge of the city's defences to launch surprise attacks and harass the Spanish forces. The narrow causeways leading into Tenochtitlan became bottlenecks, perfect for ambushes. The Aztecs used their environment-flooded causeways and breached aqueducts to make life miserable for the invaders. But here's the bitter irony. The very walls that had safeguarded Tenochtitlan now became its prison, trapping the population as supplies dwindled and disease spread. The Aztecs' downfall is a stark reminder that strategic advantage is a double-edged sword. Their fortifications, once symbols of security, became barriers to escape and resupply. The Spanish, with their superior firepower and determined indigenous allies, slowly tightened the noose. The Aztecs, despite their tactical ingenuity, couldn't overcome the harsh realities of siege warfare, combined with a smallpox epidemic that decimated their ranks. It's easy to romanticize the Aztecs as fierce warriors undeterred by the odds, but the reality is much more nuanced. They were a society caught in a perfect storm of technological disparity, biological catastrophe, and political upheaval. The Spanish, with their steel, gunpowder, and horses, represented a new kind of warfare that the Aztecs were unprepared for. And yet, the Aztecs' resourcefulness and resilience are undeniable. They adapted their strategies, exploited their environment, and fought valiantly against overwhelming odds. Now let's sprinkle a bit of gallows humor on this historical tragedy, because if history teaches us anything, it's that even in the darkest times, a little irony goes a long way. Picture the Spanish arriving in Tenochtitlan, eyes wide at the sight of a city that rivaled any European capital in grandeur. They came expecting gold and glory, only to find themselves embroiled in a protracted siege against a society that fought like cornered jaguars. The Spanish might have had the guns, but the Aztecs had the home field advantage and a penchant for making their enemies regret stepping onto their turf. In the end, the Aztec Empire fell not because of a single battle or failed strategy, but due to the convergence of multiple factors: technological, biological, and social. Their fortifications, once the bedrock of their security, stood as silent witnesses to the empire's final days. The city of Tenochtitlan, once an awe-inspiring testament to human ingenuity, was reduced to ruins, its stones repurposed for colonial ambitions. As we wrap up this segment, let's keep in mind that the story of the Aztecs is far from over. Their legacy lives on, not just in the ruins and artifacts, but in the cultural and historical narratives that continue to shape our understanding of this remarkable civilization. The Aztecs were more than just warriors and builders. They were a society that thrived on innovation and adaptability. And as we continue to explore their world, we'll uncover even more layers of their story, each more intriguing than the last. Stay tuned for the next chapter in our journey through the Aztec Empire, where we'll delve deeper into the socio-political dynamics that shaped their rise and fall. As we pivot to the legacy of Aztec fortifications, let's step back and take a gander at how these stone marvels fared under the scrutiny of European conquest and beyond. Spoiler alert, They didn't exactly get the red carpet treatment. When Hernan Cortés and his band of conquistadors rolled into town, they weren't just bringing horses and steel, they were armed with a whole new playbook, one that didn't exactly leave room for respecting local architecture. Now, you might picture these fortifications as being the ancient equivalent of Fort Knox, impenetrable, formidable, the stuff of legends. But the reality was a bit more, shall we say, nuanced. The Aztecs had walls, sure, but these weren't the Great Wall of China. They were more like the Great Wall of, please keep out unless you have gunpowder. The Spaniards, with their firearms and cannons, had the technological upper hand. It was like bringing a tank to a sword fight. No wonder those stones didn't stand much of a chance. That said, these fortifications weren't just about brute force. They were imbued with cultural significance, a symbol of Aztec prowess and divine favor. Yet, when Spanish cannon started blasting, those symbols crumbled along with the stones. It's a harsh reminder that while walls can represent strength, they can also become monuments to vulnerability when the tides of change roll in. But here's where it gets interesting. The story of Aztec fortifications didn't end with the Spanish conquest. Far from it. Modern archaeology has been peeling back the layers of history, revealing not just the physical remnants of these walls, but the stories they tell about Aztec society. Excavations have unearthed sections of the walls and causeways, giving us a glimpse into the engineering and labor that went into their construction. It's a bit like finding the rough draft of a masterpiece, full of insights into the craftsmanship and ingenuity of its creators. These findings challenge the romanticized myths of Aztec invincibility. They reveal a society that was as much about adaptation and resilience as it was about sheer force. The walls, it turns out, were not just barriers, but also bridges, both literally and metaphorically, connecting the past to the present. They serve as reminders of a complex civilization that thrived through innovation and adaptability, even in the face of overwhelming odds. And let's not forget the reinterpretation of these fortifications in the modern world. Today they symbolize more than just ancient warfare. They stand as cultural icons representing the ingenuity and spirit of a people who once turned a lake into a thriving metropolis. In a world obsessed with fortifications, be they digital firewalls or physical borders, the Aztec walls offer a sobering reflection on the limits of defense and the power of human resolve. The legacy of Aztec fortifications is a testament to the enduring human quest for security, a quest that often blurs the line between protection and isolation. In today's world, where the walls we build are as much ideological as they are physical, the Aztec example serves as a cautionary tale. It's a reminder that walls can protect, but they can also imprison. They can symbolize strength, but they can also become relics of a past that failed to adapt. So, as we wrap up this exploration of Aztec fortifications, let's take a moment to reflect on the lessons they offer. In a world where the allure of building walls, be they literal or metaphorical, remains ever present, the Aztec experience teaches us that true strength lies not in the stones we stack, but in the stories we tell and the connections we forge. Ultimately, the Aztec fortifications remind us that history is not just about the past, it's a living dialogue with the present and future. The walls may have crumbled, but the stories endure, challenging us to learn from the past and build a more resilient future. So, next time you find yourself pondering the walls we build today, think of the Aztecs and their legacy. A legacy that speaks not just of power and protection, but of the enduring human spirit that transcends the barriers we create. A bustling town known for its gingerbread might not sound like the birthplace of revolutionary astronomical theories, but Toru, Poland, in 1473 was precisely that. Nestled in northern Poland, this medieval town was more renowned for its sugar and spice than for any cosmic insights. Yet, it was here that Nicolaus Copernicus took his first breaths. His early years were filled with the clatter of horses' hooves on cobblestones and the sweet, spicy aroma of gingerbread. A far cry from the celestial spheres, he would later ponder. Growing up in this confectionery capital, young Nicolaus was surrounded by a world that was far more terrestrial than astronomical. His father, Nicolaus Sr., was a well-to-do merchant who dealt not in stars but in spices, copper, and the occasional cloth. The family was comfortably ensconced within the economic realities of a thriving trade town, and when we say comfortably, We're talking about the kind of comfort that comes with a house big enough to include a few extra rooms for the inevitable family drama and a fireplace to keep those Polish winters at bay. Education was a luxury in the 15th century, but the Copernicus family wasn't pinching pennies. Nicolaus was sent to the cathedral school in Wojciech, where he was expected to learn the basics: reading, writing, and not poking the bear, literally, as bear baiting was a thing back then. This early education set the stage for his later intellectual pursuits. He was the kind of kid who probably had the medieval equivalent of straight A's, all while the street outside bustled with merchants haggling over the latest batch of gingerbread. The economic backdrop of Copernicus's life was as complex as a Renaissance painting. Toru was part of the Prussian Confederation, which meant it was under the thumb of the Polish crown, but had a fair bit of autonomy. This was no small potatoes. Toru was strategically located along the Vistula River, making it a key player in the Hanseatic League. That's medieval speak for we're kind of a big deal in the trade world. This economic vibrancy meant that Nicolaus grew up in a milieu where ideas were traded as freely as goods, a factor that would later influence his astronomical musings. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Nicolaus was still a kid in a world that believed the Earth was the center of the universe. A geocentric model, they called it, where the Earth was the star of the show and everything else took a back seat. This wasn't just a scientific theory, it was practically dogma. The Church was all in on this idea since it conveniently placed humanity, and by extension, divine creation, at the center of everything. Questioning this was akin to suggesting that gingerbread wasn't delicious, a surefire way to get yourself ostracized, or worse. In this environment, Copernicus's early education didn't exactly scream future astronomer. His teachers were more concerned with instilling piety and a good grasp of Latin than any notions of celestial mechanics. But hey, he learned to read and write, which was quite the ticket to upward mobility in a time when illiteracy was as common as fleas on a medieval dog. His schooling also gave him the basic framework of arithmetic and geometry, the building blocks of any good scientific mind. As Nicolaus grew, the realities of his world began to shift. His father passed away when he was just 10 years old, leaving his uncle, Lucas Watson Rhodes the Younger, to step in. Uncle Lucas was no slouch. He was a canon at the cathedral in Frombork and later became the Bishop of Warmia. This ecclesiastical connection gave young Nicolaus a newfound path, the church. And in a time when career options were as limited as reality TV plotlines, the church offered a stable and lucrative life. But let's be real. Copernicus's path to becoming the father of modern astronomy was not a straight line. His early life was a series of fortunate events tinged with the right amount of privilege and opportunity. He wasn't some starry-eyed dreamer gazing up at the night sky from a peasant's field. He was a well-educated young man with connections and a knack for mathematics. And while the heavens might have seemed distant at first, his journey was just beginning, set against the backdrop of gingerbread and trade routes. The bustling trade, the economic priorities, and the ecclesiastical ties all formed the backdrop of Copernicus's early life. It's a testament to the complexity of history that out of this melange of spices and commerce emerged a mind that would one day flip the universe on its head. The young Nicolaus Copernicus was poised on the threshold of an intellectual journey that would echo through the annals of science. But for now, he was just a kid from Toru, living in a world that smelled faintly of gingerbread. The world that smelled faintly of gingerbread was about to get a whiff of academia as young Nicolaus Copernicus packed his bags for an intellectual adventure across European universities. With the ink barely dry on his early education, he was off to the University of Krakow in 1491. Now, don't let the romanticism of university life fool you. This wasn't all toga parties and philosophical debates over ale. Back then, students were more likely to be nose-deep in Aristotle than throwing frisbees on the quad. Krakow was a bustling hub of learning, a place where the medieval met the modern, and Copernicus soaked it all up like a sponge. He was supposed to be focusing on the typical curriculum of the day law, medicine, theology. But it was the stars that really caught his eye. You see, Copernicus was a bit of a rebel in the academic sense. While his peers were deeply engrossed in the nitty-gritty of canon law, Copernicus found himself starstruck by the heavens. It was a classic case of following your heart, even if it leads you off the beaten path. But let's not pretend this was some easy leap into the cosmos. Education in the 15th century wasn't exactly a budget-friendly endeavour. Tuition could range anywhere from a few florins to enough to buy a small herd of sheep, depending on the prestige of the institution and the subject matter. Fortunately for Copernicus, he had a financial ace up his sleeve, his uncle, Lucas Watson Road, who just happened to be a bishop. With clerical connections and a wallet to match, Uncle Lucas ensured that Nicolaus could afford to dabble in the celestial without having to count pennies, or, rather, groszy. After Krakow, Copernicus's academic journey took him to Italy, a land of art, pizza, and, crucially, the University of Bologna. Now, Bologna was the Ivy League of the day, the kind of place where intellectual giants roamed the halls. But here's the kicker. Copernicus wasn't initially there to study astronomy. He was enrolled in law. Yes, you heard that right, law. A field as dry as the parchment it was written on, at least compared to the twinkling allure of the night sky. Yet, it was at Bologna that Copernicus's accidental romance with astronomy truly blossomed. Picture this, a studious law student who can't help but peek at the stars. Enter Domenico Maria Novara da Ferrara, the university's resident astronomy professor. Novara was the kind of mentor every budding astronomer dreams of, knowledgeable, slightly eccentric, and willing to take young Nicolaus under his wing. Together they conducted observations of the night sky, and just like that, Copernicus was hooked. Here's where myth meets reality head-on. The romantic notion is that Copernicus gazed at the heavens and saw his destiny written in stars. The truth? He was probably just looking for a way to spice up his law studies. After all, staring at legal tomes night after night can make anyone yearn for a bit of cosmic wonder. But this serendipitous detour was anything but fruitless. It was in Bologna that Copernicus began to question the long-held geocentric model of the universe, though he kept these musings largely to himself at the time. Let's not gloss over the economic and social backdrop of all this stargazing. The late 15th century was a time of significant change, with the Renaissance stirring the pot of human thought. Yet, for all the intellectual freedom it promised, the period was also rife with political and religious tensions. The Catholic Church, a powerful patron of education, had a vested interest in maintaining the status quo, geocentrism included. Questioning the centrality of Earth was akin to questioning the very order of society itself, a risky business for anyone without the right connections. That's where Uncle Lucas's influence was crucial. As a bishop, he had the clout to protect his nephew from the inquisitive eyes of ecclesiastical and secular authorities who might have frowned upon such radical ideas. In a world where questioning the heavenly order could land you in hot water, sometimes literally having a well-placed relative was like having a get-out-of-jail-free card. And let's not forget the sheer cost of being a student overseas. Travel wasn't cheap, and neither was accommodation. We're talking about a time when a decent bed could cost as much as a year's supply of bread. But Copernicus managed to navigate these financial waters, thanks in large part to his uncle's deep pockets and strategic foresight. This economic support allowed him to continue his studies without the distraction of financial woes, a luxury few could afford. So, what do we have? An aspiring lawyer who found himself starry-eyed in Bologna, balancing the pragmatic with the celestial. It's a story that combines the romance of intellectual discovery with the harsh realities of medieval academia. Copernicus's path was not one of straightforward ambition, but rather a meandering journey through the complexities of education, economics, and ecclesiastical influence. As we close this chapter, remember that Copernicus's academic wanderings were just the beginning. His time in Bologna set the stage for the monumental shifts he would later propose, all while navigating the intricate dance of politics, religion, and science. The stars were aligning, but as with all great stories, the best was yet to come. Stay tuned, because our cosmic journey is far from over. As the curtain rises on part 3, we find that Copernicus, the erstwhile law student turned celestial enthusiast, is about to do something that would make even the Renaissance's most daring thinkers sit up and take notice. Enter the Commentarioluses, a little book with a big idea. Written around 1514, this was Copernicus's first foray into turning the universe on its head. Literally, the Commentarioluses was not a public manifesto, but more of a whisper among trusted friends. An astronomical mixtape passed around in secret. In it, Copernicus proposed something radical. The Earth was not the center of the universe. Instead, it was just another planet orbiting the Sun. This was the heliocentric model, and it was as revolutionary as suggesting that the Earth was round in a world convinced it was flat. This idea was a cosmic curveball aimed squarely at the heart of geocentrism, the prevailing belief that Earth was the universe's VIP section. Now, why did Copernicus keep his heliocentric ideas under wraps? Picture the political and religious climate of early 16th century Europe. The Catholic Church was not just a spiritual authority, but a political juggernaut with the power to make or break careers and occasionally lives. Questioning the geocentric view was akin to questioning the Church's interpretation of the Bible. It was like pointing out the emperor's new clothes without the safety net of a fable. Copernicus was well aware of the stakes. He wasn't some naive dreamer, he was a strategic thinker, keenly aware that challenging the celestial status quo could land him on the Church's radar, and not in a good way. The Inquisition had a reputation for being somewhat unforgiving of heretical ideas, and Copernicus was not in the mood to become a martyr for science. So, he played it safe, circulating his ideas only among a select group of scholars. You could say he was the original, by invitation only, kind of guy. But let's not forget that Copernicus wasn't just an armchair astronomer. By day, he was a church canon in Frombork, a picturesque town on the Baltic coast. This was no mere title. It was a job that came with responsibilities and, crucially, a steady income. Being a canon wasn't exactly a 9-to-5 gig, but it did involve overseeing church revenues, managing lands, and ensuring the clergy followed the rules. It was a position that required a head for numbers and a knack for diplomacy, both of which Copernicus had in spades. This ecclesiastical role was more than just a day job, it was a financial lifeline. The salary of a canon was nothing to sneeze at, providing Copernicus with the means to pursue his passion for astronomy. Think of it as a medieval version of a side hustle, where the day job funds the dream. While others might have splurged on indulgences or extravagant clothing, Copernicus invested in astrolabes and celestial maps. His nights were spent under the stars, not in the taverns, as he meticulously charted the heavens. Let's address the myth of Copernicus as a lone genius toiling away in isolation. Reality check. He was part of a network of scholars who were quietly questioning the universe's design. This was a time when intellectual correspondence was carried out at a snail's pace, with letters taking weeks or even months to reach their destination. Yet these exchanges were a lifeline, allowing Copernicus to test his theories and refine his ideas with the input of other curious minds. The Commentarioluses, though groundbreaking, was not devoid of errors. Copernicus's calculations weren't perfect, and his models lacked the precision of later astronomers. But let's cut him some slack. He was working with the tools of his time, which were about as advanced as a sundial compared to today's telescopes. Despite its imperfections, the treatise was a game-changer, a spark that would eventually ignite the scientific revolution. Economically speaking, Copernicus's position as a canon provided him the freedom to explore these radical ideas without the immediate pressure of financial insecurity. In a world where most people were more concerned with their next meal than with the movement of celestial bodies, Copernicus had the luxury of being able to ponder the universe's mysteries. It's a stark reminder of how economic stability can fuel intellectual progress, a lesson that resonates even today. As we continue this historical odyssey, keep in mind that Copernicus's story is not just one of celestial discovery, but of navigating the intricate dance between science and society. He was a man of his time, leveraging his position and connections to push the boundaries of human understanding while deftly sidestepping the political landmines of his era. So, buckle up, because the cosmos is vast and Copernicus is just getting started. We've got a front row seat to a revolution that will shake the foundations of science and religion alike. And as the stars continue their eternal dance, so too does our story, with more twists and turns waiting just beyond the horizon. As our cosmic drama unfolds, Copernicus stands on the brink of his magnum opus, De Revolutionibus Orbium Coelestium, a title as grandiose as it is revolutionary. Picture Copernicus now, not just as a starry-eyed dreamer, but a man grappling with the gritty logistics of getting a book published in the 16th century. This wasn't just any book, it was a celestial bombshell that dared to suggest the unthinkable, that Earth wasn't the universe's VIP. It was the astronomical equivalent of dropping the mic. But first, you had to make sure the mic was actually built. The year is 1543, and Copernicus is in the twilight of his life, quite literally on his deathbed. You'd think he'd be resting easy, but no. Our man is busy overseeing the final touches on a book that would flip the cosmic script. You see, Copernicus was nothing if not strategic. By publishing right at the end of his life, he executed the ultimate Irish goodbye to controversy. Drop the bomb, and then exit stage left before the dust settles. Now, getting a book published back then was no walk in the park. Forget about hitting print and calling it a day. We're talking about a time when each page was painstakingly typeset by hand. The printing press, still in its relative infancy, was the tech equivalent of dial-up internet. Slow and prone to errors. Plus, printing costs could make your head spin faster than Copernicus's heliocentric model. An entire book could run up a tab equivalent to buying a small vineyard, and that's before you even factor in the distribution. A logistical nightmare when your delivery system relies on horses and sailors rather than drones and FedEx. Enter Georg Joachim Rheticus, a young mathematician and Copernicus's #1 fanboy. Rheticus was instrumental in persuading the cautious astronomer to finally publish his theories. Think of him as the hype man to Copernicus's headliner act. Rheticus recognized the revolutionary potential of Copernicus's work and was determined to see it in print, even if it meant a bit of subterfuge. The book was printed in Nuremberg by Johannes Petraeus, a publisher with the guts and the printing press to take on such a controversial project. This wasn't just a scholarly endeavor, it was an audacious gamble. Now, let's talk about the reception. If Copernicus had hoped for immediate applause, he would have been sorely disappointed. The initial response was lukewarm, to say the least. The book's preface, penned by Andreas Osiander, a Lutheran theologian, tried to temper the content by presenting it as a mere mathematical hypothesis rather than a literal description of the universe. It was a classic case of don't shoot the messenger. But this was no mere footnote, it was a strategic maneuver to soften the blow. Osiander's caution wasn't just academic prudence, it was survival instinct, given the Church's iron grip on cosmological doctrine. For those who did pick up the book, it was a slow burn. The mathematical complexities of Copernicus's work weren't exactly light reading. Imagine trying to sell calculus textbooks to a world that still found long division challenging. This wasn't a bestseller. It was a dense tome that required a reader with both patience and a penchant for the esoteric. But for those who understood its implications, it was nothing short of earth-shattering pun fully intended. Economically speaking, the Revolution Ibis was a hefty investment. The cost of producing the book was significant, and distribution was a monumental task. We're talking about shipping boxes of heavy tomes across Europe, navigating everything from pirate-infested waters to treacherous mountain passes. It was the medieval equivalent of launching a Netflix series in a world without internet. The entire enterprise rested on a precarious balance of academic ambition and financial risk. Despite the challenges, the book did reach its intended audience, eventually. Scholars, mathematicians, and astronomers began to take notice, and slowly, ever so slowly, the heliocentric model began to gain traction. The universe, it seemed, was starting to get a little bigger. But let's not romanticize this as a straightforward triumph of science over superstition. The Catholic Church, the ultimate arbiter of cosmic truths at the time, was not immediately alarmed. In fact, it took a good 60 years before the Church officially condemned Copernicus's heliocentric model, adding it to the Index of Forbidden Books in 1660. If anything, the delay only highlights the slow churn of institutional change and the layers of bureaucracy that even cosmic revolutions had to navigate. Copernicus himself, however, was spared from witnessing the backlash. By the time De Revolutionibus was stirring up whispers among scholars, Copernicus had already shuffled off this mortal coil. It's as if he had orchestrated the ultimate drop-and-vanish act, publish your life's work, and then exit the stage before the critics have a chance to weigh in. A shrewd move, if ever there was one. So, there you have it. A tale of celestial upheaval, financial gambits, and strategic retreats. Copernicus's final act was not just a testament to scientific courage, but also to the intricate dance of timing, politics, and economics. It's a story that reminds us that even the most groundbreaking ideas need a dash of cunning and a hefty dose of luck to see the light of day. And as we pause on this threshold, Remember that the universe was never the same after Copernicus dared to imagine it differently. Yet, our journey through this astronomical saga isn't over. There's more to uncover in the cosmos, and Copernicus's legacy will continue to ripple through the annals of history. Keep your telescopes handy, because we're far from done exploring the stellar landscape he so boldly charted. Yet, as Copernicus's magnum opus made its quiet debut on the stage of history, it didn't exactly bring the house down. Imagine a cosmic revelation so grand it could have left audiences gasping, yet instead it was greeted with polite applause and the occasional yawn. The truth is, the celestial upheaval he proposed was met with a level of indifference that could rival a Monday morning staff meeting. Copernicus was not immediately hailed as the father of modern astronomy, but rather as a footnote in the grand script of the cosmos. Fast forward to the 16th and 17th centuries, when the wheels of scientific thought began their slow, creaky turn. The heliocentric model, initially a whisper in the corridors of academia, started to gain traction, thanks in no small part to a couple of scientific heavyweights, Galileo Galilei and Johannes Kepler. Think of them as the dynamic duo of astronomical advancement, each bringing their unique flair to the Copernican cause. Galileo, with his telescope, a contraption that was the medieval equivalent of a smartphone camera, saw the moons of Jupiter and realized they didn't give a fig about orbiting Earth. It was like catching a celebrity in sweatpants, unexpected and slightly scandalous. Despite his groundbreaking observations, Galileo's insistence on the heliocentric model landed him in a bit of hot water with the Vatican. Remember, the Church had a thing for being the celestial authority, and Galileo's findings were about as welcome as a skunk at a garden party. Meanwhile, in the realm of mathematical precision, Johannes Kepler took Copernicus's somewhat circular ideas and gave them a much-needed elliptical makeover. His laws of planetary motion were the mathematical equivalent of a tune-up for Copernicus's cosmic jalopy. Kepler's calculations proved that planets really do move in elliptical orbits, adding the kind of scientific rigor that could turn a skeptic into a believer. It was like finally understanding that the cosmos ran on German engineering. Still, the road to acceptance was anything but smooth. The Copernican model faced resistance that would make a stubborn mule seem compliant. It took nearly a century for the heliocentric theory to gain widespread acceptance, and even then it was often more tolerated than celebrated. The Catholic Church, with its grip on astronomical orthodoxy, didn't officially retract its condemnation until 1822, long after Galileo's telescope had gathered dust and Kepler's ellipses had made their mark. Yet, slowly but surely, the Copernican model began to weave itself into the fabric of scientific thought. It was a bit like watching a glacier move, agonizingly slow but unstoppable in its path. By the time Isaac Newton rolled around with his laws of motion and universal gravitation in the late 17th century, the heliocentric model had found its rightful place in the annals of science. Newton's work took Copernicus's ideas and gave them the kind of mathematical backbone that would stand the test of time. It was like discovering that the universe had a rulebook, and Copernicus had penned the preface. Now, let's not forget the economic and social backdrop that helped or hindered this astronomical revolution. Copernicus's ideas emerged from a world where economic priorities often overshadowed intellectual pursuits. The gingerbread-laden streets of Toru, with their bustling trade and political machinations, unwittingly created a crucible for revolutionary thought. The Hanseatic League, with its web of trade routes, was the medieval internet, spreading ideas and spices with equal fervour. The townsfolk, more concerned with profit margins and market stalls, might never have imagined that their economic ecosystem was nurturing a cosmic upheaval. So, what's the takeaway from this celestial saga? Copernicus's legacy is a testament to the power of persistence and the slow march of progress. His work laid the groundwork for future astronomers, challenging them to look beyond the horizons of their own understanding. It's a story of how one man's quiet musings in a gingerbread-scented town eventually shook the universe to its core. In the grand narrative of history, Copernicus's revolution was less of a cataclysmic event and more of a gradual shift, like the turning of the tide. It reminds us that even the most profound changes often start as whispers, echoing through the corridors of time until they become the loudest voices in the room. While Copernicus himself might not have lived to see his theories take flight, His ideas soared higher than even he could have dreamed, leaving a legacy that would illuminate the path for generations to come. And as the stars continued to chart their eternal course across the night sky, Copernicus's contribution endures, a silent guardian of the heavens, reminding us that the universe is a much bigger place than we could ever imagine. So next time you're gazing up at the stars, spare a thought for the man who dared to reimagine the cosmos, all from the unassuming cobblestones of a gingerbread town. Once upon a time, in the thick forests of what we now call New York State, 5 nations decided they'd had enough of the chaos and figured they'd give peace a whirl. And thus, around 1450, the Iroquois Confederacy was born, a political alliance that deserves more than a footnote in your high school history textbook. Think of it as a cross between a medieval United Nations and a particularly effective family therapy session. So, who were these peace seekers? The Confederacy brought together the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca nations, later joined by the Tuscarora in 1722. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. In the world before European colonization, these groups weren't exactly on a first-name basis with harmony. They were more like those neighbors who can't agree on where the property line is and occasionally lob a lawn gnome over the fence for emphasis. Enter Hiawatha and Dekanawada, the historical equivalent of a dream team. Hiawatha, despite what Longfellow's poem might have you believe, was not some mythical figure, but a real Onondaga man, though some sources suggest he was a Mohawk. Details. His compatriot Dekanawada, known as the Great Peacemaker, was the brains behind the operation. Together they crafted the Great Law of Peace, a system that would make even a modern-day bureaucrat jealous with its complexity and effectiveness. The Great Law of Peace laid the groundwork for what was effectively one of the first known forms of democracy on the continent. While Europe was still figuring out how to balance the whole divine right of kings thing, the Iroquois were busy establishing a system that put power in the hands of the people, or at least the male clan leaders, because let's not get too ahead of the times here. Now, here's where it gets juicy. The Confederacy's governance wasn't just a hastily scribbled pact. It was a carefully structured system that made sure no single nation got too big for its moccasins. The Grand Council, made up of 50 sachems, or chiefs, represented each of the 5 nations. These sachems were chosen by the clan mothers who wielded significant influence. That's right, matriarchal power in action, long before it was #worthy. The Confederacy's decision-making process was a masterclass in consensus. It wasn't about a quick vote with a convenient majority. No, each decision required unanimous consent, which sounds about as easy as getting your entire family to agree on where to go for dinner. But somehow, it worked. The Great Law of Peace was recited at councils, memorized by those who couldn't write it down, making it a living constitution long before anyone had even heard of parchment. Now, let's take a moment to appreciate the foresight here. This wasn't just a let's all get along moment with a campfire sing-along. It was a sophisticated political structure that allowed for conflict resolution, trade agreements, and communal decision-making. It was the ultimate peace treaty that actually stood the test of time. And speaking of time, the Confederacy lasted for centuries, even as European settlers arrived and shook things up in ways only colonizers can. But let's not romanticize this too much. Sure, it sounds idyllic, but the reality was more complex. The Iroquois weren't just sitting around singing Kumbaya. They were a formidable military power, adept at both negotiation and combat. Their influence stretched far beyond their borders, and they managed to play colonial powers against each other like a well-tuned fiddle. And while their governance was groundbreaking, it wasn't entirely egalitarian. Women, despite their influential role in choosing leaders, were excluded from the council itself, reflecting the gender norms of the time. The Iroquois Confederacy's political savvy didn't go unnoticed. Fast forward a few centuries, and you'll find that their system influenced the likes of Benjamin Franklin and other founding fathers of the United States. There's even an argument to be made that the Great Law of Peace served as a model for the U.S. Constitution. Of course, the founding fathers conveniently skipped the bits about clan mothers and unanimous consent. I mean, why take all the good ideas, right? As we dig deeper into the Iroquois story, remember that this isn't just about governance, it's about survival. The Confederacy was born out of necessity, a response to the relentless cycle of violence and retribution that plagued the region. Hiawatha and Dekanawada's vision wasn't just lofty idealism, it was a practical solution to an age-old problem. And that, in itself, is worth a standing ovation, or at least a respectful nod from history buffs everywhere. In the next few parts, we'll explore how the Iroquois Confederacy maintained its power, the role of women in this unique governance system, and how they navigated the turbulent waters of European colonization. But for now, let's raise a metaphorical glass to a group of nations that figured out how to make democracy work long before it was cool. Now, speaking of raising metaphorical glasses, let's toast to the powerhouse women of the Iroquois Confederacy. These women weren't just sitting in the back of the longhouse, knitting and churning out kids. No, they were orchestrating the political landscape like an ancient boardroom of CEOs. Picture a matrilineal society where lineage and inheritance passed through the female line. It's like handing down the family business to your daughter rather than your son. Radical, right? This structure put women in the driver's seat, giving them the power to choose the sachems, those vital 50 chiefs who ran the show. So, how did this all play out in the day-to-day? The clan mothers, the unsung heroines here, weren't just figureheads. No, they were the real deal, holding the power to appoint or even depose sachems who stepped out of line. Imagine if your HR department had that kind of clout. It was a system that ensured leadership remained accountable to the people, or at least to the mothers. A sachem who strayed too far from the path of good governance could find himself out of a job faster than you can say unanimous consent. Let's pause and give these women the credit they deserve. I mean, it's not every day you hear about a political system where women had such direct influence over leadership. In a time when most women around the world were lucky to have a say in what they wore, Iroquois women were busy shaping policy and ensuring the continuity of their society. It's the kind of historical narrative that often gets sidelined in favor of more glamorous tales of men in power. But here we are, shining a light on the ladies who were the real MVPs of the Confederacy. And now, let's sidestep into the economic implications of this matrilineal society. With property and inheritance passing through the female line, women had a significant say in economic decisions. They controlled the agriculture, which, let's face it, was the backbone of the Iroquois economy. Corn, beans, and squash, the three sisters, weren't just crops, they were the sustenance of the Confederacy. And who better to manage this agricultural empire than the clan mothers? These women were the original agricultural economists, ensuring not just survival, but prosperity. But let's not sugarcoat it. The system wasn't a utopia of gender equality. While women wielded considerable influence behind the scenes, the public political sphere still excluded them. It was like a corporate boardroom where women could choose the CEO but never take the chair themselves. The Iroquois society, for all its progressive elements, still reflected the gender norms of its time. Yet they were light years ahead in giving women a role that mattered, a role that had real, tangible power. Take that, glass ceiling. Now, here's where it gets deliciously ironic. Fast forward to the modern corporate world, and what do we see? A gender dynamic that's still struggling to catch up. Women, even today, often find themselves fighting for a seat at the table. A table that Iroquois women were practically setting up themselves centuries ago. The Iroquois Confederacy offers a compelling case study in how gender roles can shape and be shaped by societal structures. It's a reminder that the past isn't just a dusty relic, it's a mirror reflecting the challenges we still face. And let's not forget the storytelling here. The romanticized version of history often paints a picture of stoic warriors and wise sachems with women relegated to the background. But the reality is far more nuanced. These women were the architects of their society, weaving the fabric of governance with a deftness that would make any modern politician envious. The myth might be appealing, but the truth? That's where the real power lies. As we continue our journey through the annals of Iroquois history, let's keep this in mind. The past is a tapestry rich with lessons and warnings. The Confederacy's matrilineal structure wasn't just a quirk of history, it was a foundational element that allowed them to thrive. So, as we tip our hats to the clan mothers who shaped a nation, let's also question the narratives that have too often sidelined women's roles in history. The Iroquois women were more than just footnotes in a patriarchal tale. They were the authors of their own story, one that continues to resonate today. In our next exploration, we'll delve into how the Confederacy navigated the turbulent waters of European colonization, and how this unique society adapted in the face of monumental change. But for now, let's celebrate the original boardroom powerhouses and their indelible mark on history's canvas. Stay tuned for more intrigue from a society that was anything but ordinary. As we gear up to dive into the Iroquois' intricate web of trade and diplomacy, it's worth noting that these folks were the original networkers, long before LinkedIn made it socially acceptable to stalk someone's career history. The Iroquois Confederacy, with its impressive political structure, didn't just stop at internal governance. Oh no, they took their show on the road, building trade networks that spanned a couple of time zones, give or take a few hundred miles. Picture the Iroquois trade system as the pre-colonial version of Amazon Prime, minus the 2-day shipping, but with a lot more character. Their trade routes stretched from the Great Lakes to the Atlantic coast. We're talking about a network that connected with tribes as distant as the Algonquin in the north and the Cherokee in the south. The Iroquois were trading heavyweights, dealing in goods like corn, furs, and wampum, those shell beads that doubled as currency and jewelry. Think of wampum as the Bitcoin of its day, though slightly less volatile and considerably prettier. Now, let's tackle that pesky myth of the noble savage. This romanticized narrative paints indigenous peoples as untouched by the complexities of economic life, living in harmony with nature like some Rousseau-inspired fairy tale. The reality? The Iroquois were economic powerhouses, well versed in the art of negotiation and trade. They weren't just exchanging a few pelts for trinkets, they were savvy operators in a sophisticated economy. The Confederacy's trade networks were crucial in establishing alliances and maintaining peace, or, at times, asserting dominance. In this world, trade wasn't just about goods, it was a strategic tool, a way to flex political muscle without resorting to bows and arrows. And then the Europeans arrived, bringing with them not just new goods but also a whole new level of chaos. When the Dutch first rocked up in the early 1600s, they were probably more interested in fur than friendship. The Iroquois, never ones to miss an opportunity, quickly adapted to these new trading partners. The beaver fur trade became a particularly lucrative venture. If you thought the gold rush was intense, you should have seen the beaver rush. The Iroquois managed to play the Dutch, and later the English and French, against each other, keeping the colonial powers guessing and the pelts flowing. But let's not pretend this was all smooth sailing. The introduction of European goods, especially weapons, added a volatile element to the mix. Suddenly, the stakes were higher, and the Iroquois had to navigate a world where European interests often clashed with their own. Yet, despite the challenges, they maintained a level of autonomy that was both impressive and precarious. It was a delicate balance between cooperation and conflict, with the Iroquois often holding the upper hand in negotiations thanks to their strategic location and political acumen. In the midst of all this trade and diplomacy, it's important to remember that the Iroquois weren't just passive participants in a European-dominated world. Far from it. They were active players, shaping the dynamics of the fur trade and influencing colonial policies. Their ability to adapt and thrive in this new economic landscape was nothing short of remarkable. The Confederacy's political alliances were strengthened by these trade networks, which in turn reinforced their internal cohesion and external influence. But let's not get too carried away with admiration. The fur trade had its darker side, and it wasn't all about mutually beneficial exchanges. The demand for pelts led to overhunting, which disrupted local ecosystems and strained relations with neighboring tribes who found themselves competing for dwindling resources. Here, the Iroquois' economic savvy collided with the harsh realities of environmental degradation and intertribal tensions. It was a classic case of economic growth meeting ecological limits, a story as old as time, or at least as old as capitalism. And while the Iroquois were busy navigating these choppy waters, the Europeans weren't exactly playing nice. The British and French, in particular, were notorious for using trade as a means to divide and conquer, offering alliances to some tribes while undermining others. The Iroquois, however, didn't just sit back and let it happen. They were masters of playing one side against the other, ensuring they got the best deals and maintained their power. It was a high-stakes game of diplomatic chess, and the Iroquois were more than capable of holding their own on the board. So, as we marvel at the Confederacy's economic and political prowess, let's also acknowledge the complexities and contradictions that came with it. The Iroquois' sophisticated trade networks were both a source of strength and a potential Achilles heel, vulnerable to the whims of European powers and the shifting dynamics of their world. Yet, through it all, they remained a formidable force, adapting and evolving as the landscape changed around them. In our next exploration, we'll delve deeper into how these trade networks influenced the Iroquois' interactions with both European settlers and other Native American tribes, setting the stage for the Confederacy's continued resilience and eventual transformation. But for now, let's tip our hats to the Iroquois traders and diplomats who managed to keep their balance on the tightrope of history, walking the line between opportunity and risk with a skill that would make any modern-day economist nod in respect. Stay tuned for more tales of intrigue, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of survival in a world that was anything but straightforward. So, as we marvel at the Confederacy's economic and political prowess, let's pivot to another juicy chapter of Iroquois influence, their uncanny impact on the United States Constitution. Yes, you heard that right. The Founding Fathers didn't just pull democracy out of a dusty European history book. They had an unexpected tutor in the form of the Iroquois Confederacy. This is where things get downright fascinating and a bit controversial. Picture the late 18th century, a time when powdered wigs and quills were all the rage. Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, and their cohort were knee-deep in the business of nation-building, and they needed a guide that wasn't tyrannical or, well, British. Enter the Iroquois Great Law of Peace, a system that had been rocking consensus governance for centuries. Franklin, that quintessential Renaissance man, was so intrigued by their model that he became a vocal advocate for its merits. Now, before we get swept away in a wave of historical romance, let's make something clear. The Founding Fathers didn't just copy-paste the Iroquois Constitution onto their parchment. No, they cherry-picked like kids in a candy store. They admired the Confederacy's federal system, a loose union of sovereign states keeping a balance of power. Sound familiar? It should. This idea of a central government that still honored individual states was a radical concept at the time, and the Iroquois were living proof of its feasibility. Franklin, ever the diplomat, made no secret of his admiration. In 1751 he wrote, "It would be a strange thing if 6 nations of ignorant savages should be capable of forming a scheme for such a union, and yet a like union should be impractical for 10 or a dozen English colonies." Ouch, Ben. He clearly had a knack for putting a stinger in his praise. But don't let the backhanded compliment fool you. It was a genuine nod to the sophistication of Iroquois governance. Jefferson and his pals, meanwhile, were obsessed with the ideals of liberty and equality, and while they were busy drafting documents that would echo through history, they couldn't help but notice that the Iroquois had been practicing a form of democracy long before it was cool. The Confederacy's system of checks and balances, with each nation retaining its sovereignty while cooperating on common affairs, was a blueprint in action. But here's where the romanticism meets reality and things get a little awkward. The Founding Fathers, in all their wisdom, left out some of the best bits. Gone were the clan mothers and their political clout. Unanimous decisions? Too cumbersome for impatient revolutionaries. Instead, they leaned heavily on majority rule, a concept far removed from the Iroquois' painstaking consensus. It's as if they took a gourmet recipe and decided to skip the spices. Our founding documents, like the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, reflect a profound appreciation for individual rights. Yet, they also reveal a glaring omission: the indigenous voices that had demonstrated the power of unity and peace. While Franklin and Jefferson acknowledged the Iroquois influence, their final drafts were decidedly Eurocentric, missing the egalitarian tones that might have transformed American democracy into something even more revolutionary. So why did this happen? Partly, it was the times. The Enlightenment was a massive influence on the Founding Fathers, with its emphasis on rational thought and individualism. The Iroquois model, while admired, was perhaps seen as too communal, too foreign. And let's face it, the Founding Fathers were nothing if not products of their own era, with all the limitations that entailed. Plus, there was the small matter of how the Iroquois Confederacy was perceived. Despite Franklin's admiration, many colonists saw the Iroquois as noble yet primitive, an outdated view that colored their willingness to fully embrace indigenous systems. The romantic notion of the noble savage was alive and well, even as it was being debunked by the very sophistication of Iroquois politics. Then there's the irony of it all. as the United States expanded, it often did so at the expense of the very people who had inspired its founding principles. The Iroquois, like many indigenous groups, faced dispossession and displacement as the young nation stretched its wings. Talk about a thankless legacy. It's like throwing a party, stealing the cake recipe, and then kicking the bakers out. Yet, despite the oversight, the Iroquois Confederacy stands as a testament to the enduring power of governance built on cooperation and respect. It's a reminder that democracy didn't spring fully formed from the minds of a few white men in Philadelphia. It was a mosaic, pieced together with ideas from across cultures and centuries. As we ponder this historical tapestry, we can appreciate the Iroquois' role in shaping a nation, even if their contributions were lost in translation. The romantic tale of their influence remains appealing, but the reality is far more complex and, dare I say, more compelling. It's a narrative that challenges us to look beyond the surface, to question whose voices get heard in the halls of power. In the grand scheme of history, the Iroquois Confederacy didn't just whisper into the ears of the Founding Fathers. They provided a blueprint that, while not fully realized, still resonates today. It's a story of inspiration and oversight, of admiration and appropriation, wrapped up in the messy, wonderful complexity of human history. So, as we continue to unravel the threads of the Iroquois legacy, let's keep our eyes open to the lessons they offer. Because if history has taught us anything, it's that the past isn't just a collection of dates and names. It's a living dialogue, a conversation that continues to shape who we are and who we aspire to be. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where we'll delve deeper into how the Iroquois navigated the shifting sands of European colonization and what that meant for their place in a rapidly changing world. Until then, let's raise a metaphorical glass to the Iroquois Confederacy, the unsung architects of a democratic experiment that is still unfolding. And so, as the Iroquois Confederacy stood at the crossroads of history, their saga offers more than just a window into a bygone era. It serves as a mirror reflecting the quirks and contradictions of human governance. You see, the Iroquois didn't just stumble upon their sophisticated system, it was a carefully crafted response to perennial chaos, a political Rosetta Stone that somehow translated tribal disputes into a chorus of harmony. The Confederacy's legacy is as much about what they achieved as it is about what others failed to glean from their example. The heart of the Iroquois' enduring influence lies in their ability to blend unity with diversity, a lesson many modern governments could stand to remember. While the world continues to grapple with political polarization, the Iroquois had already cracked the code centuries ago. Their system wasn't about crushing dissent. It was about weaving it into a fabric, resilient enough to withstand the pressures of time and tide. It's as if they took the concept of agree to disagrees and turned it into an art form long before Twitter turned disagreements into sport. Let's talk specifics, because who doesn't love a good data point over brunch? Their governance structure was a marvel of checks and balances. Each of the 6 nations retained its sovereignty, yet they worked together under the umbrella of the Grand Council. This council, requiring unanimous decisions, was a painstaking exercise in patience and diplomacy. Imagine a parliamentary session where every MP had a veto, and you'll get a sense of the Herculean task they undertook. It wasn't the quickest way to make decisions, but it ensured that when decisions were made, everyone was on board, or at least not actively plotting rebellion. Fast forward to today, and you might wonder why more of the world hasn't taken a page out of the Iroquois playbook. Perhaps it's because the founding fathers of global democracies were too busy squabbling over their own power plays to notice the genius in their backyard. Or maybe the idea of a political system influenced by indigenous models was too radical for those steeped in European tradition. Whatever the reason, the fact remains, the Iroquois Confederacy offered a prototype for a balanced government, one that many modern states still struggle to emulate. Now, it wouldn't be a proper history lesson without addressing the myths that have romanticized and, at times, obscured the Iroquois story. The image of the noble, peace-loving Iroquois often glosses over the harsh realities they faced. While they were indeed champions of diplomacy, they were also warriors who fiercely defended their territory and autonomy. Their military prowess was legendary, and they weren't shy about flexing that muscle when necessary. It's a reality that, while less palatable, is crucial to understanding their resilience. And let's not sugarcoat the impact of European colonization. The arrival of settlers brought with it a Pandora's box of challenges, from disease to land theft. not to mention a barrage of treaties that were about as reliable as a politician's campaign promise. The Iroquois adapted with remarkable ingenuity, but even they couldn't dodge every curveball. The American Revolution, for instance, threw their alliances into disarray, forcing them to navigate a political minefield that would daunt even the most seasoned diplomat. Yet, with all the upheavals, the Iroquois Confederacy endured, their principles echoing through time like a drumbeat. The 19th and 20th centuries saw them face assimilation policies and forced relocations, yet they held on to their identity. The Indian Removal Act of 1830, for instance, threatened their very existence, but the Iroquois proved to be as stubborn as they were strategic. They lobbied, negotiated, and sometimes just plain outlasted the bureaucratic onslaught, ensuring their survival against staggering odds. And here we arrive at the modern-day relevance of the Iroquois governance ideals. In a world fraught with division, their model of consensus and cooperation stands as a beacon of what could be. It's a call to remember that true governance isn't about the loudest voice, but the collective wisdom of many. The echoes of their great law of peace can be found in movements advocating for environmental stewardship and social justice, where decisions are made with an eye toward harmony rather than hegemony. But here's the kicker. Despite their profound legacy, the Iroquois and other Native American tribes continue to fight for recognition and rights in a society that often overlooks their contributions. It's a bitter irony that the architects of one of the earliest democracies are still seeking a seat at the table in the very nation they helped inspire. This oversight isn't just a historical footnote, it's a call to action, to acknowledge and integrate indigenous wisdom into our modern political discourse. So, as we wrap up this journey through the Iroquois legacy, let's not just admire their achievements from afar. Instead, let's ask ourselves why their principles haven't been more widely adopted. Is it fear of the unfamiliar? A reluctance to admit that ancient systems could teach us something new? Or perhaps it's a stubborn clinging to the status quo. Whatever the reason, the Iroquois offer lessons not just in governance, but in humility, reminding us that wisdom sometimes comes from the places we least expect. In the end, the Iroquois Confederacy is more than just a historical curiosity. It's a testament to the power of unity, resilience, and vision. As we ponder their story, let's strive to honor their legacy, not merely with words, but with actions that reflect the inclusive and cooperative spirit they championed. Because if history has taught us anything, it's that the past isn't just a series of events, it's a guidebook for the future, waiting for us to finally read between the lines.